Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start off with some admin on fire evacuation procedures, which I'm obliged to read out. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Thank you. And please can all members and the public to switch their phones off or turn them to silent. Thank you. Right. It's now 6:30 and I shall commence the meeting. For the benefit of the members of the public attending, I'd like to explain who everybody is around this table. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I am the chairman of the committee. Down the sides of the table, on my left and right, are councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions of the applications this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising councillors. In addition, I would like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before us tonight and will make a decision based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everybody remains polite and professional throughout the evening. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete, following any questions from members of the committee. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and ask members to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Right, we're going to crack on now with agenda item number, I'll go through the agenda, is apologies for absence of substitutions. Are there any? Councillor Potter.
Apologies on behalf of Councillor George Hood. I'm sorry it's a late notice, but he's not very well, so apologies from George.
Thank you. Any other notifications? Councillor McCormack.
In reference to item 1, which is a pub, I'm a member of the campaign for Real Ale, but I don't think it will affect the decision tonight. I'll just mention that because it's listed in the register of interests.
Thank you, and I'll just declare that I have to declare it. Agenda item number 8 has reference to the AOMB. It's in fact located in the North Wessex Down area of outstanding national beauty. I sit on the Council of Partners of that organisation as a representative of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. I also happen to be the vice chair of the organisation. So the agenda item referred to, number 8, has already had an input from the AONB officer of the council, and so I have no problem about that. I won't be interjecting anything else into that application, and I will, if necessary, vote. Sorry, that does, and for the record, that's item 6, not item 8. Councillor Leeks.
Chairman, I'll be leaving the room for item 5, land east of Sherburn Building. I'm a trustee of the hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing else? There's no urgent declarations of interest. There's no urgent matters. And we come on to the meeting held on the 5th of April 2017. Are we agreed on the contents for accuracy of those minutes? Agreed. Thank you very much. I will sign them at the end of the meeting. So applications of planning permission. Item number 1, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application in relation to the former Lamb Inn in Hackwood Road, Basingstoke. The proposal is for the demolition of the existing buildings and the redevelopment of the site for a total of 10 residential units comprising 5 apartments and a maisonette and 4 semi-detached dwellings. I draw members' attention to the update sheet with a correction to the housing mix from that reported in the main agenda. Unit number 3 was reduced from a 2-bed unit to a 1-bed unit throughout the course of the application and has been assessed on that basis. So the agenda paper sets out the mix, therefore an increase in 1-bed units to 2 and a reduction in the 2-bed units. And as a result, this means that the parking requirement has also been reduced from 15 to 14 spaces. Thereby reducing the deficit in relation to parking standards to 2. You'll also note on the update paper additional comments from our building control officer, who has visited the property along with representatives from Landmark Estates and their surveyors. And this was in relation to the structural survey report that was submitted with the application, and as you can see, the inspection has confirmed that the key points raised in that report in terms of the condition of the building, key points to note, it being in a poor overall and structural condition. You'll also note on page 2 of the agenda paper some additional comments from Councillor Parker, primarily in relation to the parking provision within the vicinity of the site. There's also officer comment to those, and also reference to a new policy in your local plan which relates to developments for residential units meeting a water efficiency standard, and therefore an additional condition is proposed to secure that standard. It's a fairly detailed report, and members will note the site lies within the Fairfields Conservation Area and is also a notable building. The key policy tests are in relation to CN7, which is the loss of essential facilities, and there are 3 tests set out on page 71 of the agenda. All of those have been assessed by the officer within that report, together with the impact on the heritage asset, i.e. the conservation area. The application is recommended for approval with a number of conditions, together with the additional one I've just referred to in relation to water efficiency.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Ms. Fitzgerald and Mrs. Revel, if I've pronounced that correctly, to come forward to the table, please? And the microphone stand there's a single button. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please, and I take it you're on your own.
I was on my own anyway. I don't know who the other person was.
Okay.
I'm Debbie Revel, Basingstoke Heritage Society. I'm obviously going to try and speak in defence of the lamb. The lamb has been on this site in Basingstoke, much as it looks today, since 1875, with some changes in 1903, when it was given this kind of Tudor Beethan makeover, which was then a popular contemporary style. The officer's report notes that when the Fairfields area was designated as a conservation area in 2003-04, the lamb was considered a notable building, occupying a strong landmark site, visually prominent. We believe, the Heritage Society believes, that great efforts should have been made to preserve the existing building while converting it into multiple dwellings. We think that the site should have been properly protected from the outset to prevent access by people who have wrought more destruction. Frankly, this building has been allowed to fall down. We knew, Basingstoke Heritage Society knew, that the building was in danger nearly 2 years ago, and in September 2015 we nominated for the Council's local list, their own list of buildings or structures with an historic or architectural importance, the purpose of which is designed to alert developers to the significance of the structure that they intend to destroy. As the list was not being followed up, nothing happened, in spite of reminders from the Heritage Society, and this small extra protection for the building was lost. The officer's report notes the absence of the lamb on the local list. Our view is that it should have been on the list, and that the council were remiss in not dealing with nominations. We urge members and officers to do more to protect the town's old buildings. As a society, we can only do so much, and this plan, once passed, is a failure for the town.
Thank you. Could I ask you to sit down back again, please? Yes, please. Sorry, maybe I should have explained at the beginning, because some people haven't been here before. I now give the members of the committee a chance to ask you some questions. They may not, but at least I'll give them the opportunity. Members, any questions for the speaker? And that's what happens sometimes. Thank you very much. Peter Crozier, Ben Olds, Richard Sturt. Any combination of the three? Gentlemen, good evening. I hope you probably worked these microphones before, and between you, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My name's...
It's a very sensitive microphone. You don't need to lean into it. It'll pick you up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My name's Peter Crozier. I'm the agent for the application. This is my colleague Richard Sturt. He's the project surveyor. I'd just like to say a few words on the planning issues and matters before Richard says a few words on the condition of the building. So the first thing I'd just like to draw members' attention to is the fact that there are no technical objections to this application proposal. As the officer pointed out, it's a robust report with a recommendation for approval, which we of course agree with. We've worked hard with officers to deliver a scheme which benefits the conservation area. That visual enhancement to the conservation area is acknowledged in the officer's report. We've revised the plans and drawings several times to address concerns, in particular amending ridge heights, reducing the massing and form of buildings. We've made changes to the bin stores and the bike provision and the parking layout to address concerns. As the officer noted in the update report, one of those changes has resulted in a reduction in floor space in one of the units, reducing it from a 2-bed to a 1-bed unit. Consequently, there is reducing the parking requirement for the site accordingly. That has led your highways officer and your planning officer to conclude that there are no adverse highway impacts would arise, and accordingly it complies with the relevant development plan policy. There are clear benefits from this application proposal. Again, as pointed out in your officer's report, contribution to the council's housing land supply, a good mix of dwellings to meet a local need, make much better use of a centrally located, very sustainable site. It would deliver a visual enhancement of the site, benefiting the conservation area, generate council tax for the authority, coupled with the new homes bonus, and it would also provide an opportunity to resolve any site drainage issues. So once again, I'd just like to stress there are no technical objections to the application, and it complies with the relevant development plan policy. I'll leave my colleague Richard to say a few words about the condition of the building.
Thank you, Peter. The building has reached the end of its life and is unviable. At the outset of this project, we undertook a structural survey that identified serious structural defects to the building. There was structural movement that was historic and is still ongoing, significant water penetration from the car park, extensive rot throughout the building. Previous publicans had removed supporting walls at ground floor level to create better areas, but obviously reducing the structure of the building. Corrosion of steel joists in the cellar, and insufficient support to the actual roof, which caused deformation to the walls below.
You have 1 minute.
Building control have now inspected the building, both internally and externally, and have independently verified our findings of the survey. Due to these defects, the building cannot be converted, and the only viable option is to demolish the building and redevelop the site. Whilst not discussed in the previous part of the hearing this evening, we also took a view of policy CN7 and the planning officer report clearly identifies that there'll be no loss of community use, and there are sufficient community uses in Basingstoke, and we are in line with the policy.
Could I ask you just to finish up? That's it?
Yep, finished.
Thank you. And if you switch your microphone off, please. There's a muting system around the table, that's all. Members, any questions for the applicant? Nope. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Potter?
I wonder if I could just discuss with the officers the thesis relating to parking provision, because obviously, as we all know, the site is a fairly critical junction position, and obviously, by any definition, any parking that flows from it could have an adverse effect upon the areas around. I see in the calculations that are made, I mean, we should be talking ideally about 15 parking spaces, and 12 are proposed. The commentary from the officer talks about, given that the development only provides 3 spaces short, well, that's a 20% shortfall, obviously, so it's fairly significant. But it goes on to say it's not considered necessary to impose a planning obligation on the developer to restrict applications from future occupiers for parking permits. I mean, I would have thought that that was something that we could usefully look at. It seems to me, as it stands, there's going to be this potential shortfall, and those people are going to have to park somewhere, and parking around there is pretty critical. If it is exacerbated in the future by the habits, obviously, of future occupiers, it seems to me that could make matters worse. I am not sure about the planning process here really in regard to what we can do and what we can't, but it does seem to me logical to not make it any worse than it is, and it's a 20% shortfall as it stands. I'd just like to hear an officer's comment or two on that, Chair, if I may.
Sorry. Just to clarify, as in the report in the update paper, due to the change in housing mix, it's 14 spaces as per the standards. See, each of the units will be allocated 1 parking space and 2 visitor spaces. And we feel, as set out in the report, that, and obviously also as concluded by the highway officer, that this would be sufficient provision, given also the extremely sustainable town centre location. And that therefore we officers concluded that it would not be reasonable to impose an obligation to apply for parking permits, and therefore we feel that the scheme represents sufficient parking provision along with sufficient turning and manoeuvring within the site itself to be recommended for approval.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the plan, and on this plan, which is the same one we've got up on the screen, I only see 10 parking spaces. Where are the other 4?
The requirement for the standards is 14. 10 spaces are provided, 1 for each of the units, along with 2 visitor spaces, which are marked in a V, and the plan's not very clear to the left on that screen, to the extreme left on that screen. So and 2 in the Undercroft. Again, they are marked on the plan, but it's quite faint. So there's a total of 12 on site, the standards seeking 14. So there's a deficit in terms of meeting the standards of 2.
Anyone else? Councillor McCormack.
This is going to be a fairly wide-ranging question, so I'm not sure how much of it's going to be answered. But I was a bit concerned to hear from Debbie Reevell and the Heritage Society that we may have missed something with a heritage building, what could have been done maybe 2 or 3 years ago, because this building's been empty for quite some time, and it appears that it has deteriorated significantly in that time. Would I be right in thinking that 2 years ago, had we intervened, this building could have been saved? That's my first point, and the other one relates to what we're going to put on it. Obviously, the developer's looking to maximise return on investment, but I'm really concerned about the parking and the facilities, given this location, given that it's on a junction with two quite busy roads, with extreme restrictions on parking due to the nature of the layout there. And I don't quite understand why we're saying, or appear to be saying, we've got the need for 14 bays, but 12 bays is all right, because those cars are not going to go anywhere else. If you go to the site on a number of different times of day, times of week, there's often quite a lot of car parking there on the road in awkward. It's difficult to find locations to park, so I'm just a bit concerned about the fact that we've only got 12 bays.
And with regard to the building of local interest process that the Basingstoke Heritage Society mentioned, that is a process that we do have. It has no statutory designation or protection. I think the key point here to note is obviously the site lies within the conservation area, which does have a statutory and a much stronger protection, and that is against which the application has been assessed. So even if the building had gone through that local interest process, it wouldn't have given it any greater protection. It would have been than we've considered under here. In fact, it's far stronger, the test against the conservation area legislation.
Yes, Councillor McCormack, yeah.
So, I mean, the concerns I have, I mean, this is not the first case where we've had an old building that may have been of interest in the town, that's kind of been allowed to fall apart, because I remember Worthing Infant School, we had a similar debacle a few years ago. And it's in a conservation area, and we've got to the point where we had a building that is of merit in a conservation area has been allowed to effectively all but fall down. It kind of raises questions in my mind as to, you know, why do we have conservation areas, and why are we not doing more to enforce the conservation in these areas? Because this building is now going to have to be demolished. My understanding is it's not viable to restore it, because you'd effectively be having to demolish it anyway and build an exact replica of that building on the site. But presumably in a conservation area, that could be something that we could insist having to happen to preserve the nature of that conservation area.
If the building was listed, then there would be an opportunity to enforce the repair and upkeep of the building. This building, although recognised as notable, it doesn't have any statutory protection in terms of heritage legislation, and there isn't a similar protection with by virtue of the fact of lying within a conservation area.
So my question still stands: why have we got a conservation area? What possible benefit have we got from conservation area if one of the key buildings in that conservation area has been allowed to go?
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose just in terms of explaining that different level of protection in terms of heritage assets, so there's the local list in terms of buildings which may be put forward in terms of identifying locally interesting or buildings that could be on the local list. There's the statutory designation in terms of buildings within the conservation area, and within that there's conservation area appraisals, which then identify notable buildings, if you like, that contribute to that kind of wider area and character. But then beyond that, I suppose, there is the statutory list of listed buildings, which is the Historic England designation. And the issue here is that effectively the building is a notable building within the conservation area, so clearly it has some importance, but because it's not a listed building, it doesn't have any, the council doesn't have any ability to require repair or amendments to it should it fall into disrepair during that period. So effectively the protection, if you like, is that the applicant would have had to have applied for planning permission as part of this application to secure demolition. So that's the part where there is some control and some input from the council, but there's nothing that could be done in terms of ensuring that the building didn't fall into disrepair in the first place through its current designation simply as a notable building within the conservation area.
So my understanding, though, is we have a local list and that moves were made to put this on the local list, but it wasn't actually put on the local list. So how did that come about?
So just to clarify, the local list is obviously different to a listed building in terms of the Historic England designation of a listed building. So the local list is a lesser grade, if you like. I think the key issue here is twofold. One is, as Mr. Adams pointed out, the statutory designation of it being a building in a conservation area provides more protection to it as a building as opposed to being on the local list. The second issue, I suppose, which is a wider issue, which probably falls outside the remit of this committee, but it's for other committees in terms of we are in the process of reviewing our process for nominations of local list. In fact, we've engaged more recently with Basingstoke Heritage Society on that point. We will be taking something forward to the portfolio holder to review how we go about that to ensure that it is a more responsive approach. But I think the key issue here is that whether or not it was on the local list would make no difference to its current position, because the designation of it being a notable building in conservation area is a higher protection than it simply being on the local list.
Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I won't be brief, really. It's along those lines, really. I noticed in the report that we've got a conservation officer, and this is a notable building within the Fairfields conservation area, and you know, the Heritage Society have raised the issue of the building. I just find it a little bit strange that we haven't had any commentary from the conservation officer. That's quite unusual for this type of building, and from members, I think it'd be quite useful to have had something. I mean, it says there's no objection subject to conditions. That's quite a short statement from the conservation officer. I've expected, especially some of the other recent applications we've had, they've been quite detailed reports.
Yes, we don't have the full detailed comments in there, but on page 75 at the bottom, the last paragraph, it does make reference to the conservation officer agreeing with the conclusion, and that's in relation to the information put forward with the application. So right at the bottom, there's a quote there from the comments received from the conservation officer. The last sentence.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, reading the report, I mean, it sounds as though this place is a bit of a death trap. And I just wonder how a building which in the past took in the public, how it could have got to a state whereby, I mean, they appear to have taken out walls which supported structures within it. I mean, how would that have been safe in the first place? I mean, is there no sort of regulation that they would have been come under?
Yeah, that's not a material planning consideration. I mean, we obviously need to assess the application that's before us, and we wouldn't have had any control or awareness of that.
Yeah, I'm aware it's nothing to do with this. I just wondered how it would have come about, and would they have not had a building control involved or something?
I think the answer is we don't know, because if you don't, you can't solve, put something right you don't know about. Any more? Councillor McCormack.
Trying to assist the process. It was a public house. It had internal modifications on it. Is there any scope for this committee to have a policy formulated where we have buildings that are going to be used to the public, that might have internal modifications done that might affect the safety of those members of the public using it? Could there be a policy put in place where they would have to apply for internal modifications so that we could then see what they're doing and make any notifications about whether it's likely to undermine or in some way erode the structural integrity of the building going forward? This particular example, we've had a number of different things that have happened to the building that have effectively weakened the structure to a point where it's no longer sound. So I think that, to me, that sounds like there's scope for policy there.
Thanks for the input, Councillor McCormack. It's not this committee, it's the EPH committee who have the power to evolve policies within the borough. As I had the misfortune to chair it for 3 years, I've got a lot of experience on it. So it would be a very good idea. I don't know, how you can go onto the work program of EPH, because I think that would be the best way to highlight this particular issue and get the committee to evolve a policy, because the portfolio holder would automatically get involved in that. I think it's quite valid. But we can take what the council has at the moment on its conservation and its notable buildings. So it's not a blank sheet of paper, and evolve a policy from that. So that's the venue, is EPH. I'm going to not cut this short because I've got my own question to the officers, because one thing I noticed within the report, two things actually, that this -2 parking spaces, one of the arguments is because of the proximity of this development to the top of town. I'm going to ask my first question, is that a valid reason to offset parking spaces depending on the locality of a particular application? Because that sets, to my mind, it sits with me as an awkward precedent being set.
So I think ultimately it comes down to the parking standards are obviously the starting point for consideration, and there is a numerical calculation that's done on that, as you know, in terms of the number of units, number of bedrooms relevant to what's set out in the parking standards. Ultimately there it's a matter of planning judgment in terms of location and any other material factors. So in this case the application's being assessed, and given the proximity in terms of it being a sustainable location, relevant to facilities and services in the town centre, the as you say, the -2, I suppose, deficit in terms of the number of parking spaces was deemed acceptable when balancing all other issues that are before the committee this evening.
Yeah, to make an overrider on this one, we're not leaving we've got an informative on page 79 to the applicant that the likelihood of additional parking permits from occupants of this particular development will probably not be issued because of the constraints of parking that have already been highlighted by other members in here. That's probably a comment from me, but it sort of compounds what I mentioned earlier on. Are there any more questions to officers? Right, I'll move into debate. For members, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to add my support to what Councillor McCormack said, but about the building being allowed to get into an appalling state. But unfortunately, as you've already said, it's not for this committee. We are where we are with it. So in terms of the building, it looks fine, but I'm not happy with the parking provision. 23 bedrooms, 12 parking spaces. It's under the parking standard, and whilst I accept that maybe people would have less cars because they are so near to town, they're walking distance from the bus station and the railway station, you're in an area where parking is considerably under pressure because people who don't want to pay for parking in town are parking in the side streets. So we're right in the middle of an area of high pressure parking, and we're saying no, they don't need as many parking spaces, and I think that's a nonsense.
Anyone else? Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Two things. I certainly agree about the parking thing. I just think it's ridiculous for us in this day and age to not allow enough according to our rules. Our rules are set to cover all eventualities when you put buildings like this, and I just think it's a nonsense that we go against our own rules. It really does not make sense to me at all. I don't know whether there's any way of us being able to I don't know whether we can trying to think of the words to use, sorry. Anyway, if I go on to the other thing, I just want to say that I have tremendous sympathy with the thought processes of the Basingstoke Heritage Society. They're a very, very good society. They've looked after Basingstoke exceedingly well, and it's sad that they have tried very hard to look after this building, and it's come to nothing.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
I think the shortfall in respect of the parking provision, much as we may, and I did, comment on it, it's probably going to be unresolvable in regard to what we have in front of us, and we either accept the provision that is contained within this application or we reject it on that basis. And thinking about that, I think a degree of pragmatism has to come into play on this. The reality is, and I obviously, as Councillor Tucker's just said, really respect the work of the Heritage Society, but the simple fact is, I think even the Conservation Officer is saying, because of what has happened, there is no alternative but to demolish the existing buildings. If you accept that, you're then into what's a commercial redevelopment of this site going to entail, and like it or not, it simply has to be done, I think, on this sort of scale of development, really, to make it work, for all of the investment that's going to be associated with that. And in terms of visual impact, I must admit I do not find it objectionable. I find it to be, in terms of the elevations, to be very acceptable. And obviously we can learn lessons regarding, as people are saying, regarding buildings within a conservation area and what supplementary policies this council might have, and I'm sure EPH and others can take that on board. Presumably the proposition here is something akin to, there's going to be this acceptance, I think, that those who live there, will not have a surplus of motor vehicles. I hope that proves to be the case because of the proximity to the town. Any visitors they have will be and can be encouraged, obviously, to park in public car parks, which are not very far away. I think that's not an unreasonable proposition, having regard to the problems around it. And ultimately, the clear decision, I think, before us is we either accept those limitations and approve this application, or we don't. And I say we have little alternative in all the circumstances, and I don't think there's a better scheme going to be put forward that suddenly promotes extra car parking spaces. I think we go with this one, Chair. And yes, I'm sorry about the history of this, and I think much more could have been done. But in terms of reality and pragmatism, I think this application has to be approved, and I move that.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
I would second it.
Okay. Any other comment? It's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Abstentions? Thank you. Well, I have the casting vote, and it will have to go to approval. Officer's recommendation. Confirmation.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So the application is approved, subject to the conditions listed within the main report and the additional condition noted on the update paper.
Item 2, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a reserved matters application for details of appearance only for land at Beech Tree Close, a residential development for 85 dwellings. Outline permission was granted and approved all other matters apart from appearance. We're therefore considering appearance only tonight. There's no update information other than the fact that members were circulated a briefing sheet from the applicant in advance of this meeting. The application sets out that 14 different house types will be proposed, and they will comply in the main with the principles of the design code which was approved under the outline application. That design code encourages a high quality approach with a variety in terms of character and detailing across the site. Officers consider that those principles have been met, and there's quite a lot of detail on those set out within the report. The application also includes information in relation to 3 conditions that were applied to the outline permission, and those are in relation to boundary treatment details, landscaping and details of garages. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the main report.
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Bonner to come forward, please? Good evening, Mr. Bonner, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. My concern is with the number of houses involved with this application. As I guess you all know, Oakley has a neighbourhood plan which was approved about a year ago, which, because of traffic issues within the village, recommended that developments be placed in 4 or 5 different places around the village so that the traffic issues are spread around. For this particular plot, I think 25 houses were suggested rather than 80 or whatever the figure is that you're looking at the moment. If you go with that number of houses, you're going to end up with more than 100 cars travelling backwards and forwards every day down Barn Lane, and the majority of them will go around Hill Road and into Oakley Lane through a conservation area which has a number of terraced houses, very old terraced houses which don't have parking, on-site parking, so people park in the road, thus reducing the road to almost single lane. With this increased number of traffic, it will cause considerable traffic chaos. It'll also head down to the school where at appropriate times there's quite a lot of traffic issues, and to the shops which have a parking problem. The parking area gets full as it is without even more traffic. So my request to you is that you conform with the Oakley neighbourhood plan and agree to 25 houses rather than the significant number that's being proposed.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Bonner? No, thank you very much, Mr. Bonner. Ms. Scott, please. Good evening, and you have 4 minutes. It's the only button on there.
Good evening. We're pleased that your officers have recommended approval of our reserve matters application for residential development in Oakley. As you'll be aware, the principle of the development of this site has already been established, with outline approval being granted in 2016. As set out in your officer's report, appearance is the only issue for your consideration tonight, and traffic is not for your consideration. If approved tonight, the site will be ready to deliver 85 much-needed homes for the district, and in accordance with the Council's housing policies, 40% of the new homes will be affordable. Over the past year, we have worked hard to ensure our application reflects and complements the existing design character seen in Oakley. Our plans have been guided by the approved design code for this site, as well as your officer's feedback. For example, following officer suggestions, we have proposed using a broad range of materials across a number of different house types. There are 14 different house types proposed in total. We have included flint detailing to enhance the most prominent homes on the site, which means that this locally characteristic material will be a visible feature for those passing through the site. Features like this help ensure that this development feels like it belongs in Oakley and is not simply an off-the-peg generic design that could be seen anywhere. We are pleased that our efforts have been recognised by our urban design team, who have stated that they welcome the local character of the houses and the use of the local architectural detail and materials. This project represents an important opportunity to provide well-designed, much-needed new homes for Oakley and the wider district. We're grateful to the Council's planning and design officers for their time and for working with us on the application. We respectfully request that on consideration you agree with your officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for the applicant? Nope. Thank you very much. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a couple of points in the report, probably not to do with the reserve matters, probably previously to the outline, I guess, but there's a mention in here that comments are awaited on the public rights of way on page 91 in our report. I'm not sure if it's 98 in your report, different page numbers, but at the top, and it says HCC, public rights of way comments awaited to be reported on the update paper. I don't think there's anything on there. And there was a comment as well on the previous page in relation to refuge collection. Plots 30 to 35 do not appear to have adequate space for refuse vehicles to turn. As for all councillors, we know what issues refuse trucks can cause us.
We haven't received any further comments from the Rights Away officer. Obviously matters in terms of highway impacts, refuse, etc. would have been considered under the layout at the outline consideration. And as I say, that we're just looking at the appearance under this reserve matters submission.
Councillor Potter.
Just to get the officer's comment, if I may, I mean, just for the public record, I mean, just to be very clear, I mean, we're looking at a reserve matters application, and the original application that we considered prior to the publication and agreement of the neighbourhood plan, which subsequently went to appeal, obviously, and the Secretary of State ruled, I think in March 2016, that the application was acceptable, and in the numbers that were contained within that outline application, i.e. 85. So the simple fact is, whatever might be said now, subsequently we have no authority as a planning committee to change the numbers that are related to this application under reserve matters. That's the situation, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. That outline permission remains extant.
Any more questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. On the public observations, one of them is length of rear gardens are inadequate. Can you tell me how big they are, and are they up to our normal standard?
Yeah. Again, I don't have that information to hand, but that consideration would have been dealt with under the layout consideration as part of the outline application. We are only concerned with the appearance of the buildings under this submission.
Any more questions? No debate? Councillor Leeks.
Only that I'm happy to move it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Potter. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
Yeah. Application approved as per the details set out in the main report.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on, item 3.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline planning application for the erection of a single dwelling to provide staff accommodation for Pamber Green Riding School. Members should note that all matters are reserved except for access and considering the principle of development. The new dwelling will be located in an area currently occupied by a hay shed store and toilet and a tack shed. The update report lists 2 updates: an amended location plan which was received showing the dwelling sited within the existing stable yard area, and in response to questions from the viewing panel, the dwelling will be single storey. Officers have undertaken a consideration of whether a condition would be reasonable or necessary to secure the storey height of the building. Officers conclude that reserve matters application would allow us adequate control to ensure the ridge height and scale of the dwelling is appropriate to its surroundings when assessed against the overall design and scale of that new dwelling. The new dwelling would be an occupational workers dwelling. It would be linked to the existing and viable horse riding school, where it's been shown that there is an essential need for the occupant to be on site, and that no suitable accommodation is available in the area. As such, the proposal is specifically being recommended for approval in accordance with policy SS6 Part F. There's no additional conditions then recommended in the agenda. Thank you.
Could I ask Karen Kirby to come forward, please? Good evening. You have the button there for your microphone. You have 4 minutes.
I've been running Pamber Green Riding School for 20 years, and recently it's been very hard keeping staff on site without the accommodation available. We're also struggling as lots of our ponies that we've had for a long time are now getting in their older years. So we've had lots of late night visits needed, which is very hard with having a young family and older ponies who need lots of late night checks. Unfortunately, you know, one of the horses that we found very early in the morning had colic overnight, and when somebody is living on site, horses give you signals that something is wrong, and unfortunately there's nobody there to pick up a horse kicking in a stable. So lots of people have said, oh, you live nearby, but actually living a mile away from the site is not close enough to keep a close eye on the animals, or to keep the security of the tack and all of our equipment that we're having to move off of site on a daily basis. The reason why we put in for the outline of the outline and we didn't go into detailed plans is because we, as long as we could have accommodation secured on site, we were quite happy to take advice from the council. If anybody's got any questions, then I'd like to answer any questions about the riding school.
Could you turn your microphone off, please? So it mutes out all theirs, not mine. Any questions, members, for the applicant? Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
I'm only being nosy. Where are you going to put your hay if you're not going to have it there?
At the moment, our hay is actually, it's been delivered straight out to the field in the winter. So we have, we can no longer keep small bales that staff could move because that was stolen with having no one on site. So we have an arrangement with a local farmer, and he brings in giant bales that can't be moved by hand, and in the winter they go straight out to the fields to the horses, and then we just have a few of them covered over by tarpaulin sheets that are on site.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Questions to officers? Councillor Mr Tucker, you are a ward member. You can speak as a ward member, or you can leave it till debate, or I offer you an opportunity to speak whenever.
Are you saying that I'm speaking as a ward member for questions to officers, or am I speaking...
As a member of the committee, you can ask questions to officers, but you have a right as a ward member to speak on this application.
Sorry, I'm pulling your leg a bit, Mr
I know you are, Marilyn.
No, I think practically everybody on this committee knows that I do not like horses stabled without residences connected to it, and I can certainly understand, especially if she's got older ponies, their need to have this accommodation. So I would support it.
Councillor Bound. Microphone, please.
Page 125 of the agenda. I know that the building is supposed to be located within the yard. That thick line that goes around the building but extends back into the field there. Could you explain that, please?
Thank you, Councillor. If you just refer to the visualiser at the moment, you'll see a amended red line plan showing the siting, the application site for the new dwelling, located within the confines of the kind of immediate stable area and not extending into the other field. This amended location plan was provided and reported in the update, showing it to be appropriately located, not as shown on page 125, which is now, for all intents and purposes, superseded.
Any more questions? Debate? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. It talks about the impact on neighbouring amenities within the report, and it says that it would not be significantly affected. They would not be significantly affected with the site of a modestly sized dwelling in the location. It's considered that the dwelling could be accommodated on the site without significant harm. It's in relation to visual amenity, overlooking loss of privacy. I think from the site viewing, that was pretty apparent. It's pretty well contained, and as this is outlined anyway, I think the access was good and the parking was good. Personally, I can't see anything wrong with it. I'm perfectly happy to support this. Officers.
Are you moving to approval? Councillor Mr Tucker?
I actually moved it, I thought.
Okay. The application is promptly proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous.
Thank you, Chair. To confirm then, the application is approved in accordance with the recommended conditions in the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And moving on, because we do have 11 applications tonight. Don't worry, I'll call a break if we do drag our feet a bit. This is 238 Kempshot Lane, officers, and Mr. Shepherd. Would you like to come forward, sir, while we introduce this, and I'll let you know when you'll be able to speak.
Thank you, Chair. This application, item 4, is for the erection of an ancillary outbuilding in the rear garden of 238 Kempshot Lane. The building will be used as a summer house with a garden store. It is 3.3 metres in height with a flat roof. This, through the application process, amended plans were received, reducing the overall roof height by 0.2 metres. There is no update to report of, and it is currently being recommended for approval. Thank you.
Mr. Shepherd, you have 4 minutes. There's a button on the base of the microphone there on your right. Just across there. That's it. There you go. You have 4 minutes, sir.
I was appalled to learn that despite the fact that the current application for the summer house is identical to the one which received an outright refusal in October 2015, apart that is from an insignificant reduction in its height, the accompanying planning department report is a total contradiction of its 2015 version. The application was initially refused on the grounds that, by virtue of its overall scale, height and design, it would appear unduly prominent and discordant element within the street scene, which would fail to respect the character and appearance of the area. And this has now been superseded by the approval of the proposed development, which it states would be an appropriate design that relates to surrounding development and host dwelling in a sympathetic manner. I'm at a total loss to understand how the planning department have now arrived at this conclusion. Councillor Mrs Court has expressed her concern that the bulk and size of the building, along with the proposed materials, will make it rather prominent when viewed from Kempshott Lane. It is not, as reported, of a similar scale to the garage it will replace. It is 2 metres longer, 0.5 metres wider and 0.8 metres in excess of the maximum height of 2.5 metres permitted by the regulations for outhouses built within 2 metres of a boundary fence, without any account having been taken of the fact that it would stand on a base 0.5 metres higher than my own property. But more importantly, the garage has a gabled roof, so that when comparing the two structures, it is quite untrue to assert, as the report does, that the reduction of a mere 0.4 metres in the height of the summer house will reduce the amount of massing to the roof. The summer house is, in my opinion, disproportionately large and overbearing, with a footprint of just under half that of its large host dwelling, measuring 3.3 metres in height, 8.5 metres in length and 5.5 metres in depth. Its sheer bulk would be exaggerated by the flat roof, which would stand roughly at the level of my bedroom windowsills, from which point downwards the entire side of my property, which is by no means small, would be totally concealed. Although my property has no side-facing windows, it would be overwhelmed by this towering structure, standing only 1 to 1.4 metres from my fence, and which, from my perspective, with its white rendered walls, would resemble a municipal toilet block.
You have 1 minute, sir.
The 2 metre projection to the front elevation, rising to a height of 3.3 metres, that is the height of the garage gable, would, in my opinion, obstruct the light to my lounge window and also be a conspicuous and adverse presence alongside my fence, and unsightly when viewed from the footpath leading to Kempshott Lane, which would surely devalue the high amenity I currently enjoy and which the borough's planning regulations are committed to preserve. The projection to the rear elevation would not be so prominent, but it could not fail to restrict the light to my already darkened north-facing downstairs window. I urge you, councillors, please to refuse this inconsiderate development, or at the very least to visit and examine the site again to gain a more detailed understanding of the problem before making your decision.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. You're spot on time. I appreciate that. Members, any questions for Mr. Shepherd? Councillor Potter.
Can I, sorry, I mean, I know you've spoken about this, but just to be absolutely clear, you're in the adjacent dwelling, which is a Heron Way address, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that was one of the 2 infill dwellings that went in some years ago, wasn't it?
That's correct.
That's right. With some objections to those, I remember. But in regard to your gable wall, that is a clear gable wall with no fenestration, no windows, is that right? So in terms of the shading effect that you were talking about, I mean, just explain to me, if you will, again, where do you think that's going to impact? That's on your front lounge window, is it? That's what you're talking about?
Could you put the microphone back on, Mr. Shepherd? Thank you very much.
It's going to project 2 feet in front of my property. Bear in mind that it's 3.3 metres high. It has a flat roof. If it were a gabled roof, I don't think it would matter so much.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Any other questions? No. Could you turn the microphone off, sir? And thank you very much. You can return to your seat now. Thank you. Councillor Court, you're the ward member. Do you want to speak now? Or?
Okay, thank you. Speaking as a ward member, I would like to thank the officers for putting this on the list to view. As a Development Control Committee member, I haven't made up my mind yet. The reason I asked for it to be viewed is because it is in a prominent location, and I'd be very interested to hear what other committee members have to say. I'll just ask one question that I have got some concerns about, is the reflection. This is a summer house, and it's very difficult to tell from the drawings that we have in our plans and also what's up on the screen there. But I have concerns the location, and those committee members that came on the viewing will have seen that you come off Kempshot Lane and you go down quite a slope. This is at the bottom of the garden, and with the glazing as it is at the moment, I have some fears that there could be reflection off that for traffic coming down. Don't know what other members feel, or if there's anything that could be done to maybe prevent that from happening. It is a large building, it is in a prominent location. Members, I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Councillor Mrs. Court as the ward member? Nope. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Thank you. I just wondered if the officers have looked into the sun reflection aspect that has been drawn to our attention.
I'd like to add a supplementary to that because it's in the same vein. It was mentioned by the ward member that I don't know, I wasn't on the viewing panel, but any aspect of coming down this slope with cars at night, we've got one aspect with the sun, but then is there any possibility of cars with headlights on at night getting reflected back from what appears to be a complete bank of glass on this particular structure?
Thank you, councillors. Okay, so responding in sort of firstly to the point of glare from the outbuilding, the orientation of the proposed outbuilding is such that the glazing would face 90 degrees either towards the house or straight towards the road. In looking at the current situation, the means of enclosure that currently enclose the garden are 1.8 metre high close boarded fence. At car level, or pretty much the same level you can see on the visualizer from the photo, you only see the top proportion of any glazing that would be on that building. Secondly, the trees and buildings on the horizon mean that any reflection of direct sunlight, if you were standing 90 degrees facing that building, any reflection would have to be at an incredibly low level, almost on the horizon, given the level you would be standing or driving at. And secondly, thirdly, I beg your pardon, the use of glass is not uncommon in any building or outbuilding. It's not necessarily mirrored, and it won't be one-way glass that reflects all light, as we know. It would be the same level of reflectivity as you would see from the adjoining house. The ground floor windows. Thus, not glass doesn't necessarily reflect light, and if it does, and if it did glint, it would only be for a very short period of time, maybe a second, half a second, if someone was going incredibly slowly with a car at night. Thanks.
Any other questions? There was somebody else. Councillor Potter.
Only, grateful for the officer's comments really, but in regard to the point that's been raised about cars coming down Kempshot Lane at night time with their headlights, I mean the distance from the Kempshot Lane to the this proposed unit is going to be something like 40 metres, I would have thought, isn't it? And, I was just quickly I haven't got a 1 to 500 scale, but I mean, we're talking about a considerable distance, and unless people's headlights are really out of kilter, it seems to me they're not going to get anywhere near the sort of angle that would cause any problem at all.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Jay. Can we just go back to the last picture we had with the fence and the... can I just clarify that I think on the site viewing, the officer showed us where he believed the height of this will be in relation to that, the new height, and confirm it's roughly below that white square on the building. Is that correct? Just below that, what looks like an alarm actually. But yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, if you can see, it's not, again, you'll be looking at distance, but just where the mouse cursor is, there is a small, what appears to be an alarm box. That is approximately from distance where we believe the flat roof height of the proposed outbuilding will be. The existing outbuilding extends probably, I would sort of estimate, about 20 to 30 mils higher than that at its ridge.
Any more questions? If not, debate. Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I take on board Councillor Court's concerns, which we discussed on site on Friday in relation to the glazing. It was quite, once you actually got there in the vehicle and looked at it, it was from where it is, as Councillor Potter said, in relation to the junction. I don't believe that would be an issue. I mean, it's probably not a planning issue anyway, I guess, planning committee issue. So I don't think that would be an issue. And I also think that you got a tree there and the boundary fence, which I think would also stop any reflection from car headlights. And to be honest, I couldn't. There's been a reduction in the height and design that's in the report. To my way of thinking, I can't see anything wrong with it at all, and I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. And Councillor Potter. Right. Moved and seconded. All those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? 1, 2, 3. That's carried. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. To confirm then, the application item 4 is approved, subject to the 3 conditions listed in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to agenda item number 5.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the erection of a temporary ward and linked walkway building comprising between 12 and 14 beds in a detached standalone building at the North Hampshire Hospital. There is no update to report. The application would result in the loss of 14 car parking spaces immediately to the south of the main Sherborne building car park, currently used by private patients. However, as members will note from the papers, that a parking survey information was submitted which identified that there is some capacity within that car parking, along with additional capacity in the Candover Clinic car park. The application has been balanced against that small loss of parking provision against the provision of providing this accommodation in order to provide better care for patients at the hospital. There'll be no increase in patients. The application is, as I said, to provide better facilities than exist at present. The application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you. Mr. Mahoney. Good evening. You know what the microphone is, and you have 4 minutes.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Chair. My name is Paul Mahoney, the Chairman of Ruxdown Parish Council. Ruxdown Parish Council firmly believe we should support the development of NHS facilities to support the increasing demand on the NHS service provided by North Hampshire Hospital, our neighbour in Ruxdown. But what the Parish Council has found in the relationship we have with the hospital over the years is that there has been a distinct lack of effort to manage the growing demand for parking generally, which has a massive impact on the local streets in Ruxdown. Therefore, as our consultation comments, which we submitted at the end of 2016 show, the Parish Council was extremely concerned about the impact on parking as a result of the new building from staff and hospital visitors, which will just add to the tensions on the avenue and across the whole residential site in Ruxdown. Parking generated by the hospital has a significant impact in Ruxdown, and the problem just seems to be getting worse, and that's without even taking into account this proposal, with staff and hospital visitors just dumping their cars anywhere they can find to dump them in this residential area. Cars are parked badly, cars are parked completely on pavements, cars are parked blocking bus stops, cars are parked blocking pedestrian crossing points, cars are parked making junctions very dangerous, and they are often just abandoned on grass verges or at roundabouts. And basically anywhere that owners of cars can find to just dump their vehicle and get to the hospital, that's what they do, and the situation is not very safe for everyone, not just the residents of Ruxdown. Evidence has been submitted by Councillor Bound, who will be speaking shortly, in his consultation comments at the end of last year. Councillor Bound, as our borough councillor and a member of the parish council, has been recording vehicles which have been causing our parking issues in Ruxdown, and at least 50% can be easily identifiable as belonging to staff, given the fact that the cars display the staff permits in their windscreens. Councillor Bound also daily reports problems caused on the avenue from St Michael's Hospice and along Parkprit Road and along Peggs Way and all the major sort of routes through Ruxdown. The current situation makes the roads very dangerous for all pedestrians, for cyclists, for buses and for cars. It makes it very dangerous for residents and visitors to Ruxdown. It makes it very dangerous for all drivers through the development. Even last week there was a crash on the main Parkprit Road very close to the hospital, and it was due to the fact of the sheer volume of non-resident cars parked on Parkprit Road and a member of one of the residents trying to get out of one of the roads off Parkprit Road. It makes it very dangerous for our young children and school children generally, particularly around the junctions near the school site and the community centre, and it also makes it very dangerous for our disabled residents, wheelchair users and for parents with prams. It's a significant problem, and articles have appeared in the press about how dangerous it is.
You have 1 minute.
Yeah. I often walk around the development with my dog at different times throughout the day, and basically I can see that there's many cars queuing trying to get into the hospital campus. When they can't get into the hospital campus, they just dump the cars on Parkprit Road or on many of the roads surrounding the hospital. We suggested that the Parish Council think that we are not sure how representative the surveys that were included in the application are. We are worried about the impact this application will have on access and parking availability within the grounds generally, and the impact it will have on the surrounding roads in Ruxdown. We suggested in our consultation that if the planning application was approved, such parking restrictions were to be included of a no waiting order on the avenue and restricted parking along Parkprit Road.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
And microphone off, please. in case the members want to give you any questions. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much. Mr. Crowe, please. Good evening, and button on the microphone. You have 4 minutes.
Evening, councillors and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application. I speak on behalf of Hampshire Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and I am a senior chartered town planner at Stride, Treglown. As you have heard, the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions, with no objections from statutory consultees. This includes your own highway department. I'd like to reiterate points made by the planning officer in their summary. The proposed temporary ward does not increase patient or staff numbers. The intention of the unit remains to help manage the ongoing unprecedented pressures on the hospital's capacity so that the trust can make beds available to those who need to be admitted in an emergency to specialist wards. The unit will create the space to provide flexibility to the trust in the provision of escalation space and provides beds in a care environment that will be both secure and comfortable for patients who no longer need the high level of acute care or acute nursing in specialist wards. The application before you today is a scheme which was revised in response to objections by the highway officer. These objections have now been withdrawn and full support is offered as there is no impact on the general parking provision of the whole site, highway safety or ambulance flow. Car park capacity is noted to be a concern of the parish council. This has been answered by the trust by providing a car park survey produced by Connect Consulting, a highway consultant. The remit of the survey was agreed with the council highway officers prior to it being conducted. The trust currently has 2 private patient car parks. This proposal does involve the loss of 14 private patient car park spaces, not public parking spaces. But these are within a barrier-controlled zone reserved for access by private patients only. The parking survey demonstrates that this private patient car park currently operates below capacity. The survey also established that the Candover private outpatients car park to the west of the Sherborne building has capacity to absorb this displaced 14 private patient car park spaces subject to this application. The applicant is happy to accept the proposed condition requiring a link path route with signage directing private patients from the alternative car park to the private patient wards. The revised plans also reduce the number of patient beds from 28 to 12 to 14 beds, resulting in a shorter unit to allow ambulance flow through the main car park to remain operational as at present. Therefore, I would like to reiterate that the scheme has full officer support and is fully policy compliant, including policy CN7, Essential Facilities and Services, which supports applications which improve essential facilities such as the hospitals, and policy CN9, Transport, as the application does not result in inappropriate traffic generation or compromise highway safety, as an alternative parking provision can be provided.
You have half
Thank
a minute. Oh, okay, you're finished. Sometimes it's hard to tell when you listen to somebody speaking like that. Okay, thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Rawlinson?
Thank you. On the proposal, it says it's a flat roof building and it's temporary. Can you give us some ideas, some details on what the construction of this, what this building is made of, how it's constructed? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pre-constructed unit that's delivered to site as a cabin and is placed on site on sort of concrete pads that are put down prior, so it sits on that.
Right, I've got a question. You're mentioning the Candover suite. Now, know that it's primarily private patients, but I was an NHS patient and I was sent to the Candover suite for an MRI. Now, is this going to go into the car park? And when you drive into the Candover suite, there's parking area just outside the main entrance. Is this where this thing's going to go? Because it's not exclusively, this is my point, exclusive to private patients. Because if there's capacity or under capacity in the other MRI location, NHS patients are pushed across to the Candover clinic, and I've got personal experience of that. So there's a mixture. You were emphasising private patients' car park, and I'm sorry, I was I was not a private patient, and I used it.
Yeah, the car park that's outlined red on the plan on the screen now is a barrier control car park, which is barrier control for the reason that it's exclusive to the private patients there. My understanding is there is an arrangement within the hospital that some NHS patients are do utilise the facilities within the private ward. That's an arrangement within the hospital. And my understanding was that the use of that car park was only for the private patients, but that was my understanding from our client of how that was working.
Okay, well, I'll tell you from personal experience, I had to go through that barrier to the barrier control car park. So I'm being a little picky here, but you were emphasising it in your presentation, and that was hence my comment to you on that one. But thank you very much. Any more questions? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Oh, I beg your pardon. Councillor Simon. I have my wingman here. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here to express my concern around this application. You will see my representations on this application in the papers. What I did not reference at the time was application 17/00908, as it had not been submitted yet. This application is the one that should be approved, not the one that is in front of you tonight. We should all support this other application as it is the only one that adds facilities whilst protecting car parking for staff, patients and visitors. The suggestion in this application that you can consider parking in different car parks on the hospital campus separately is nonsense. When someone drives to the hospital, I'm sure it can only be a small number who focus on their designated user type and then which car park that they should use. The hospital campus clearly has a parking capacity problem, with the impact on Rooksdown residents being well documented. The loss of 14 car parking spaces may not sound like many, but 14 cars parking in the roads takes the impact all the way to the Rooksdown Community Centre and Castle Hill Primary. How do residents in Rooksdown know that? Because we regularly have this situation already with this number of cars and more. What does this create in real terms for residents? We have already experienced many near misses with children walking to school, and that school is currently only operating at 20% of its final capacity. We certainly do not need any more due to having car parking removed from the hospital. We need to do everything in our power to make improvements to the hospital as safe as we can for everyone. I am proud to have such a well-regarded hospital in the ward, and the hospital management team have always expressed to me that they will do their best to be a good neighbour. The hospital has told me that the building of the temporary ward to the rear of the Sherborne building in the other application would be their preferred option, and I ask this committee to endorse this by refusing the application in front of you today. Rooksdown, the parish council, previous borough councillors have not objected to years of development of extra services, buildings of both temporary and permanent nature, NHS and private, I believe with many car parking spaces already being removed. Rooksdown now believes enough is enough.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions for Councillor Bound? Councillor Simon Bound. I have to do it this way. Thank you very much. Now I'll start again. Questions to officers, members. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. In view of what Councillor Simon Bounds told us regarding this other application, which seems to be universally more popular, could we defer the decision on this one until and somehow look at both in some way? Because it seems that we've got an application in that even the applicant doesn't want.
Yes, you could do. You could do that. The current one is currently out for public consultation, so that obviously has that course to run. So it may not be able to come to the June committee, but that, you know, we can definitely note that and bring them both back together if members wish that.
Any more comment on that topic? Can I just make it clear, you would, if we went down that route, would we be looking at two applications or an alternate, you know, one or the other?
Yeah, obviously you would need to make a decision on each of the standalone applications. So they, whilst they would both be before you at the same time, you could obviously look at those globally, but you would have to make a decision on each at that time.
And I understand, okay, Councillor Potter in a second, that this other application, I'll refer to it like that at the moment, would not result in the loss of car parking.
Yep, the application that's been referred to is actually on an area which, as I understand it, is currently a sort of grassed area, and there wouldn't be any loss of parking provision. It would, however, it does, however, have the higher number of bedrooms. That's 28, whereas this one is obviously a smaller number of units. But yes, no loss of parking.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
I propose that we defer it and view the two at one single meeting.
When I seconded yet, I'll go back to Councillor Potter.
I mean, Councillor Robinson's made a very sensible suggestion and you were endorsing it. I mean, it just seems to me, I understand the applicant's position where they'd quite like, I guess, to get some extant approval, the bird in the hand, all of that. But in terms of the second application, which by all description is going to be far more acceptable, I would have thought, on a number of counts, it makes absolute sense to do what's being proposed. I'm happy, if nobody else has done it, I can't remember, to second Councillor Robinson's proposal.
Does anyone, is anything more to add from the committee? I'll turn to the officers. Can you accept that?
Yeah, so, members wish to defer the application. That's based on the cumulative impact of two applications in different locations.
Right, members, proposed and seconded to defer this application, bearing in mind what the officers just said. All those in favour? Thank you very much. This application is deferred. I'll leave it to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the application is deferred until the second application, that's 1700908 FUL, is also ready for consideration by this committee, and both will be brought together.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Bounds, could you do me a favour and just mention it to Councillor Leeks that he can return to the chamber? Right, item number 6. And just before you introduce it, I'll ask Ms. Bayliss and Ms. Keys. I'll probably pronounce that wrong as well. Good evening. If you'd just like to sit there while we introduce the application, if I could ask you just to switch your microphone off, please. It mutes out everybody else. I've got the master one up here. A video.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6 is located at the Lake House in Sidmonton, Etchinswell. The proposal seeks permission for a replacement outbuilding for domestic use. This application site is currently occupied by an existing building currently used for domestic purposes. The proposed outbuilding would have vehicle parking on the ground floor and incidental residential use above. It would have a pitched roof, 6.1 metres high. Members will note the update paper. There is an additional planning condition recommended to prevent the disturbance of kingfishers. Members should also note the reason for that condition. Incorrectly refers to water voles. It should refer to kingfishers, I believe. Also in the update paper, further clarification has been provided over the impact of the outbuilding on the conservation area and the requirements of the MPPF. Comments have been received from the AONB officer. These comments have been considered in detail and are not considered to change the officer recommendation. Officers in the agenda consider that the siting scale and external appearance of this outbuilding wouldn't dominate or compete with the host dwelling and be sympathetic to the area. And in this regard, the item is being recommended for approval subject to those conditions in the agenda and the additional one. Thank you.
You have 4 minutes, ladies, between you.
Good evening. My name's Samantha Keys. This is Jackie Bayliss. We're both parish councillors representing Etchinswell, Sidmonton and Bishop's Green Parish Council. We're attending this meeting to provide a summary of the Parish Council's decisions with respect to the Lake House planning application. In terms of how the Parish Council considers planning applications, I would like to share the following information, which is documented on our Etchinswell, Sidmonton and Bishop's Green website, so that the Parish Council can make an informed response to Basingstoke Deane Borough Council. Once an application is received, all councillors are advised so they can look at the application in detail together with the site plans, elevations, block plans, design statements, etc. At the following Parish Council meeting, councillors will consider all aspects of the application, including its position in relation to the existing and neighbouring buildings, its design, whether it creates a loss of privacy or light to nearby properties, its appearance in the street scene, whether it affects local drainage or parking, and the overall needs and requirements of the parish. The Parish Council is completely objective, and any councillor who lives close to an application site or has any links with the applicant is not allowed to comment on it, as they might either have a personal or prejudicial interest in the outcome of the application. Councillors take planning applications very seriously, and objections are not made without good cause and should be grounded in planning law. They do not arbitrarily object to an application. An objection will only be made if councillors believe there is a justifiable reason for the objection. There have been 5 separate planning applications for the erection of a garage or replacement of a garage at Lake House since 2015. 4 of these planning applications have been withdrawn, leaving the application being discussed today. Each of these applications has been discussed by the parish councillors at our parish council meetings, and the decisions for all have been consistent in every case. All decisions can be found in our publicly available parish council minutes. With respect to this application, this was discussed at the parish council meeting on Wednesday the 11th of January, and the following is the minuted decision. After discussion, while the councillors appreciate that some changes have been made to this application, these do not overcome the objections previously made. Councillors therefore object to this application on the grounds that it is too large and will be very visible in a conservation area. Also, that it infringes on the privacy of adjacent dwellings. Concerns were also raised about the adequacy of the tree survey. This concludes the parish council's inputs. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you put the microphone off, please? Thank you. Members, any questions for the parish council? Councillor Potter.
Hello, good evening. Just really on the second point you were making there, I think in terms of the parish council's decision, in terms of the privacy aspect, obviously relating to adjacent properties, I didn't go on the site visit, so sorry, just bear with me if you were already. In regard to Springhurst, which I guess is the nearest property, isn't it really? I've got, 1 to 2,500 extract here, I think really, but you know the area. I mean, what would you say is the distance between this proposal that we have before us and the Springhurst house? What do you think that distance is? You obviously know the area.
Just from the side of the house itself?
From the front of the house to the building that you're talking about, I would say a couple of 100 yards.
Just to sort of, in a sense, extract the information from you, I mean, the observations that were made by the parish council concerning privacy, that's because it's within 200 metres of this house then, really, is it?
That's correct, that's correct. There's another property on the main road which backs onto this property as well. So it's effectively just two residences that, and this one's within the middle of the two.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, members? No? Thank you very much,
Okay.
ladies. Yep. And if you could put the microphone off for me, please. There you go. Mr. Partridge, please.
I'm instructed to speak against this application by the residents of two adjacent properties. This is the fourth application for a building to replace the existing garage workshop at this property. The three previous applications having been withdrawn for various reasons, including irregularities with certificate ownerships, concerns about siting, design, impact on the conservation area, effect on trees and ecology. This latest application has resolved none of those issues. The concerns of 14 residents and the parish council are summarised in the officer's report and are backed up by the objections of the conservation officer and the AONB officer. There are several key points I wish to make. The proposed building is too large and dominant for this position at the front of the site, immediately adjoining the garden of adjacent property. It is an insensitive structure that involves adding a second new floor, which is a near doubling in height and floor space, and thereby bulk and size. The proposed building is within a designated conservation area, situated between two buildings that are considered of note in the conservation appraisal. They are regarded as heritage assets and described as linked by virtue of the verdant wetland setting between them. This area is also designated as one of open views. The application was not accompanied by a heritage statement to explain the proposal and assess its impact. It simply asserted there would be no harm to the conservation area. That doesn't meet the tests of the MPPF. On the other hand, my client's commission has submitted a heritage appraisal of the proposal that concluded the proposal is poorly designed and inappropriately located. Its excessive size and conspicuous location with the open valley bottom at the south end of the conservation area will have a harmful impact on the character of the area and the privacy and tranquil enjoyment of neighbouring properties. It neither preserves nor enhances the conservation area and is consequently contrary to guidance within the MPF and policies EM1 and EM11 of the adopted plan. Today, only the roof is visible. However, the creation of a second story ensures that its prominence within the landscape is immediately pronounced, especially in winter. The Council's conservation officer drew the same conclusions about the impact of the building on the area and recommended the building be reduced to a single story or permission be refused. Photos were submitted to illustrate this point. The applicant submitted a tree report fails to address the extent of the ground excavations within the root protection zones and impact on health and well-being of the trees. The report only considers the root protection area of trees in one dimension. It does not consider the second dimension of the depth of excavation to 1.7 metres below ground levels and the impact on the stability of the trees. These are substantial trees that are recognised as making a major contribution to the character of this part of the conservation area, and their future well-being is being put at risk by the scale of the excavations proposed, as explained in the report commissioned by my clients.
You have 1 minute.
My clients are also concerned about the impact on the ecology has not been properly examined, and leaving mitigation matters to be dealt with by condition flies in the face of the usual precautionary principle that is applied in such cases. Of particular note is that the BAT report fails to consider the potential impact of light spillage from the hobby room roof lights on the bat foraging area over and around the lake, and the inconsistency of the applicant's response to the initial ecological objection that there will be no lights positioned facing towards the lake. The use of the hobby room as a rock music studio will create noise which will be amplified to the village by the presence of a large body of water and the prevailing southwest wind. My clients consider the proposal as unreasonable and acceptable form of development in the conservation area and urge that the permission is refused. If your refusal is not agreed, then planning conditions should be imposed to specifically rule out amplified music and permitted development taken away for any subsequent
Could you wind up,
alterations,
please?
such as insertion of additional windows and openings. Thank you.
Thank you for pretty much on time. If you'd like to just sit there for a second, are there any questions, Mr. Partridge? Nope. Sorry, Councillor Potter, certainly.
Hello. So just really the same sort of information that I was seeking before, I think, really, but obviously within what you've been saying, you were talking about the old vicarage. Again, because I haven't visited the site, but in terms of, and I know one of the comments that's made is that the old vicarage will face 3 garage doors and 7 windows, all emitting light and noise. But in I mean, obviously you know this, in terms of the distance there between the old vicarage and this proposed replacement for the existing garage, I mean, what would you calculate that distance to be? Do you know it?
I don't know. I mean, the officers could probably give that figure, I would have thought.
Okay. You don't know the area either then, really?
Well, I know it.
Could you put the microphone on, please? Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I went on the site visit, and I noticed that when we were sort of walking back, on the plan there, between the vicarage and the proposal, there are some buildings there, are there not?
There are some buildings, yes.
Which would obstruct the view from the vicarage anyhow, would you agree?
No, there are views through the vicarage garden and from the...
Sorry, gentlemen, can we get the microphone sorted out? Because one has to go off, one has to go on. It's the way it works.
There are views from the old vicarage, as shown in the heritage report, particularly from the garden.
Do you not agree that between the vicarage and the building, in a direct line, there are buildings?
There are.
There.
Yes, I do agree that there are buildings there, but...
Thank you. We're all getting used to these new microphones. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Partridge. Mr. Lasseter and company is all I will say. Good evening, Ian. You know the score, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. Your officer's report is thorough, and I commend the assessment of the planning merits and the recommendation to grant permission for this replacement of an unattractive asbestos roof garage with a well-designed replacement building with a room in the roof space. Those who were able to see the site on Friday will have seen the extent to which the site is visually enclosed, and in my view the building will be so well screened that it will have no adverse impact on this part of the conservation area or the wider landscape at any time of the year. The objection for the AONB officer took me by surprise. I only became aware of it today. 3 previous applications have been mentioned, and at no stage did the AONB officer object to those applications. The first one with a ridge height of 1.1 metres higher than the now proposed and with dormer windows. Likewise, the conservation area didn't object to any of those 3 applications, and the landscape officer, with whom I don't always agree, actually found no objection whatsoever because the site, trying to use her words here, there is an extremely limited zone of visual influence and the scheme requires no mitigation. She also considered that the impact on the nearby properties would be negligible. Third-party objections are set out in your report, and we've heard from the objector's representative, but I agree with your officer's assessments. Not one of the many points of objections stand up to reasonable scrutiny. To answer your question, Councillor, earlier, Springhurst is, according to the report of the officers, I haven't measured it, but the report says Springhurst is 35 metres away on higher ground. The old vicarage is 85 metres away, and there's much intervening vegetation. I pointed out those two properties on the visit on Friday. Several objectors have suggested there will be overshadowing, overlooking and loss of privacy to those properties, but given the relationships, that's plainly wrong. Allegations of harm to trees and ecology are addressed in the officers' reports, and your officers are satisfied that the proposal causes no concerns in those regards. I'll now hand over to Fabrice.
Good evening, my name is Fabrice Verisset. I'm the former chairman of the Parish Council for Etchinswell. This application has come to the council at the time. We have objected on the, at first, on the size of it. However, I'd like to mention that none of us actually train in any planning or anything like that. I have seen the building. It is a crumbly building. It is asbestos. It is falling apart and is unsightly. My major concern is the fact that having seen the property, having looked at the plans, having looked at everything has been said, all the objections come from people who live miles away from the property. My concern is that, I'm going to say victimization by very loosely, but we have, as you know, many applications coming through. Usually we've got one or two person coming. Every time Mr. Boyd's application came through, there was an entire room full of people objecting, all of them with more or less credible or incredible words to say about the property, and that is my concern, that it hasn't been given a chance. Every time there was an objection, Mr. Boyd has come back and say, I've changed the plan, I've changed what has been said, but it's a constant battle onto trying to drag him down, and that is my concern. Thank you.
Do you have anything else? Right. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, can I have Mr. Lasseter, please? In our report, it mentions about reductions in the height of the building, reductions to the footprint, and redesigns to the drop in the eaves. So it's pretty obvious there's been quite a lot of changes and alterations to try and make this acceptable in planning terms. Can you give us a bit more information on that, please?
The reduction in the ridge height was on our recommendation. The first scheme with a 1.1 metre higher ridge and 3 dormers did look bulky, although the landscape officer didn't have a problem with it. The planning officer dealing with it at that time thought that was a bit bulky, so that was the reason for the reduction. The change of the footprint, that was really to bring it out of the root protection areas of the trees and satisfy your tree officers.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lester. Members, questions to officers? Right, I'll kick off. I mentioned at the start of this meeting on this particular one that I'm on the board of members of the AOMB, and that's what I want to pick up on, is that I noticed in the update report the AOMB officer, who's a member of the Borough Council, I believe, no? Oh, it came from the AOMB, okay. They do mention something in the objections, which I know something about, is the light from the roof lights would spill upwards into the night sky in excess of 4 metres and negate the effect of condition 9 aimed at protecting bats. Also, it's to do with the Dark Skies initiative, which is going on all the AOMBs in the country. The best one near here is the South Downs. But anything in the AOMB with skylights, with roof lights, they're trying to control that because it pollutes the night sky. Now, I noticed that the response in the update, the comments of the AONB officers are noted and considered to have been adequately covered in the main report. Well, I'm sorry, I looked for that. The only thing referred to in the main report for the AONB is to do with increased height of the structure and not of the other comments in the update paper of the AONB officer. Could I ask, the two don't match up, sorry, and I'd like to know why.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the issue here is that in terms of what's in the written report, I suppose the first report, obviously that was pre-response of the AONB officer. Appreciate the point you're making. I suppose the way it's been referenced in the update is to simply say that the material impact in terms of the landscape impact of the building itself has been considered. I do take the point in relation to there's then residual impact, if you like, in terms of light pollution, etc. I think in relation to the AONB officer's comment on bats, which would normally be something that would fall within the remit of the biodiversity officer. The biodiversity officer, I believe, has been consulted on this application, has reviewed the bat information that was submitted, and has found no objection to it. So in that regard, although it wasn't a specific point referencing the issues from the AONB officer, the issue of bats has nevertheless been considered through the lifetime of the planning application.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to officers? Nope. Debate? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. We had the opportunity to view the existing garage building from the neighbouring property of Springhurst on Friday. And although the proposal will raise the roof height, it's difficult to imagine this really causing any visual problem. As we saw on Friday, it's well set into the bank as well. And I think this is so well below Springhurst property itself, which is probably the nearest property. And with all the surrounding vegetation, I just can't see any reason why, especially with the changes that the applicant's made, to any reason why it shouldn't be approved. And I propose that.
Councillor Bound.
Yes, also on the viewing, I did go right up to Springhurst House, just to sort of try to look from their perspective in terms of their front windows. And sort of looking towards the proposal, there was quite a substantial hedge in the way as well, which I think would block out any real view unless they came out of their front door and sort of went down onto the gravelled area at the front. So, like Councillor Westbrook, I can't see that there's any particular problem in terms of Springhurst. I agree that it's quite a bulky building, but it's the building which is already there is quite a bulky building anyhow, in rather a dilapidated state. So, I don't really have any problem with the proposal either.
Anything else? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bound. Yes, been proposed. You will second it. The application has been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? None. Yep. Thank you very much, officers.
Thank you, Chair. To confirm, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the agenda and the update paper. Thank you.
Right, we've been going for 2 hours. We're doing very well. We've got through 6 applications. We've got another 5 to go. I'm going to call a 10-minute break, so we reconvene at 20 to 9. Thank you. Right, we'll get back to business. Item number 7, officers.
Thank you, Chair. This is a retrospective application for an increase in an existing wall from 1 metre to 1.7 metres. The application is before you due to the level of objection received. The design of the wall is of a Gabion style, and if we can put the photographs up, obviously it's a retrospective application, so you can see exactly what the proposal is before you. Just to remind members that up to 1 metre in height would not have required a planning application because it would have fallen within the permitted development tolerances. The fact that it is increased by 0.7 metres above that is the reason why permission is required. The application is recommended for approval as per the agenda paper with the conditions set out.
Mrs. Baldwin, please. Good evening. You have 4 minutes.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm representing the local neighbours in and around Little Basing who wrote 20+ letters of objection and no letters in support. It is also worth bearing in mind that the Old Basing Parish Council objected on behalf of the wider community of Old Basing and Lichpit to the entire wall. We very much regret the need to be present today. Little Basing is a friendly neighbourhood of residents who enjoy the quiet amenity of the area. A significant concern is the precedent this will set for other local developments should the wall be allowed to remain in its current form. There is currently no residential precedent for a boundary wall of this scale, design or material in Little Basing or within the village of Old Basing and Lichpit, or indeed the wider community of the Basingstoke borough. The hedge that had been removed at Tavika provided continuity with the street scene as the middle of a line of mature hedges spanning several properties. We would challenge the assertion that the removed hedge was in poor state. Healthy hedges remain in neighbouring properties. There are occasional low-level only red brick boundaries in Little Basing which are in keeping with the area's characteristic use of red brick. This is described in the Old Basing Village Design Statement. We jointly feel the gable wall is totally alien and out of keeping with the general feel of Little Basing. While perfectly acceptable securing the embankments of the M3, it does not fit in with the acknowledged semi-rural feel of Little Basing in terms of construction, colour, size or material. In particular, we feel the application is contrary to the policies EM1, EM10 of the Basingstoke and Deane Borough Local Plan 2011 to 2029, to the design and sustainability and also the guidelines in the Old Basing and Lichpit Village Statement. To quote, they must give regard to the density, scale, layout, appearance, architectural detailing, materials, history of the surrounding area and relationship to neighbouring buildings, landscape features and heritage assets, policy EM10. The Old Basing and Lichpit Design Statement makes it clear, and this also applies to boundaries, again to quote, new boundaries and changes to existing boundaries should be of similar design and materials to those of their immediate surroundings. Walls, fences and garages should be seen as an integral part of the overall design of any development. The gable wall meets none of these criteria. The wall presents a significant obstruction to the views and access from the houses opposite, particularly Lichpit Farm Cottage, which is set at a lower level, whose views are now dominated by the gable wall. It's noteworthy the applicant's home is several multiples further away from the wall and at a higher elevation.
You have 1 minute.
Most photographs that have been submitted are from the applicant's view, not the neighbours'. Our neighbour has offered to hide the wall with some sympathetic planting. It's difficult to understand why this should be necessary unless the wall is acknowledged to be out of keeping with the environment of its current form. The planning office suggested that the wall be improved by planting to its northern face. This seems impractical given to the lack of any soil or indeed growing space between the wall and the hard road surface. It would be impossible to grow any plants in this environment because of the following point. There is no available space, there is no soil between the road and the gabion wall, and arguably the wall is already close or even over the property boundary, and this would be exacerbated by the proposed planning. It also suggested the gabion wall would be compliant without the top row of cages. The wall is currently around 1.8 metres high. Removing the top
Could I
layer
ask you
of-
to wind up, please?
Thank you. Removing the top layer of cages reduces the height to only 1.2, still out of keeping and intrusive to the public highway. Residents...
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to...
Okay, I'd just like to
Stop it.
thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. If you'd just like to sit there, we'll see and pop your microphone off. Thank you, lovely. Any questions from members? Councillor Goodison.
Good evening, Mrs. Baldwin. I presume I'm right in believing that you represent probably most, if not all, of the residents in Little Basing.
Yes, that's true.
Could I ask you...
You have to switch your microphone off, I'm afraid.
Could I ask you, as a matter of interest, did the applicant have any discussions with any of the neighbours before he decided what to do? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. Mr. Laxman and Ms. Wall, please. Just Mr. Laxman, I gather. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You found the microphone, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Ermal Laxman, and my wife and I are owners of Tafika in Little Basing. We've lived there since 2009. The road we live on is unpaved and is not maintained by the council or public expense. This is not a conservation area. In March 2006, we replaced part of a privet hedge with more solid replacement. As this section was being damaged by vehicles reversing into the hedge, there was fouling and litter. Within Little Basing there are walls, some of which exceed a height of 1 metre. There is a brick wall opposite my house, and there are many non-red coloured walls within the Old Basing area. We didn't want a brick wall, as over time the brick face starts to crack, and being that the road is unpaved, we took inspiration from gabion cages and gabion walls, which are eco-living walls which over time will weather and allow vegetation to grow between the stone gaps. This adheres to policy EM10 paragraph 60 to provide a local distinctiveness while not imposing architectural style or stifling innovation. The eco wall provides a variation on the lane. Prior to building the wall, we carried out due diligence and established from the road history that no planning permission had been sought from the Highways Authority, Basingstoke Council or Emergency Services when sections of the unmade track were privately tarmacked and the placement of speed bumps were added. And we understand it's required by the Highways Authority guidelines and Highways Road Humps regulations. We therefore concluded that the road was not classified as a highway, which allowed us to permit development of a wall up to 2 metres in height, and a wall of 1.7 metres high was built. The works took place on land which is within our property ownership, including the section of the hedge which had no planning restrictions. 9 months later, the planning officer informed us that the unmade track is actually classified as a highway, so permitted development only allowed us to have a wall up to 1 metre height using any material. A retrospective planning application was submitted, and we appointed a local town planning consultancy to review and handle the application objections and provide an independent assessment. Both the reports from the planning officer and the independent planning consultancy separately concluded that the wall does not cause any significant change or water runoff or flooding. There has been no encroachment on the lane. The wall was pulled back by 4 inches from the historic line, and on the request of my local councillor who came to the site during the build, the countryside officer responsible for the public rights of way has confirmed there is absolutely no encroachment. Access in and out properties opposite Tafika has not been compromised. The weekly refuse collection continues to occur. No complaints have ever been received from the workers. The largest refuse vehicle for Basingstoke and Dean is 2.4 metres wide, A Scania fire vehicle is 2.3 metres wide. Waste and emergency services are not compromised. The wall is not visually noticeable until you go right past it. There have been no objections about the height of the wall causing a loss of light or affecting any quality of life.
You have 1 minute.
The increase in height of 0.7 metre affecting an area of less than 4 square metres does not cause an adverse impact to the appearance of the road or character of the area. The wall or height does not cause any harm and does not compromise the aims of Policy M10 of the Local Plan 2016. After meeting with the planning officer, we recently planted 3 species of Passiflora evergreen climbers suggested by the Royal Horticultural Society for their tough hardiness and resilience. The flowers of these are long-lasting and will provide colour. We respectfully ask that before a final decision is taken, that each committee member has reviewed the detailed submission document as to the background and reasoning behind why the decision to build a wall was taken, and the rebuttal document submitted by the independent consultancy which mitigates each and every aspect of the objectors' comments, including planning, legality, flooding, encroachment, ownership and displacement. Thank you for allowing me to speak to the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laxman. Members, any questions? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Mr. Laxman. I'm a bit disappointed that you didn't feel that it would be useful to discuss what you had in mind with some of the neighbours before you actually did it. Would that not have been sensible to have had conversations with them beforehand?
Could you use a microphone, please?
The people I spoke to were the 2 neighbours on either side of my property. One, we've never actually got on with him, and we just never got on. My next door neighbour on the other side, which is number 23, she was quite happy about it, and she knew what we were doing, and she was okay with it. There's a history on why the hedge was being damaged, but I don't want to discuss it now because that's in my submitted document, and I think when you came round as well, I believe we discussed that with you as well. So there's a background to that hedge, why that hedge was removed.
Any other questions? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Mr. Laxman. Could you just run over again? I'm sorry, I know you made mention of it, but in terms of the confusion, I think that you experienced regarding the classification of the road or not, and whether in those circumstances, because your original understanding was it could have had a wall of 2 metre high. Can you just go back over that? I was trying to take a note, but I didn't quite get it all. Thank you.
So prior to building the wall, we carried out due diligence and established the road history of, we're trying to understand the road history, whether it was a highway or it wasn't a highway, because it's an unpaved road. We didn't know what it was. If you look up in the internet, one said it's a public right-of-way, one says it's a track, one said it's a public thoroughfare, so we weren't very sure about it. So we looked up the planning history, and we found that there was no planning application made against the Highways Authority, Basingstoke Council, or the emergency services, especially when sections of the track are tarmac with permeable materials, because it causes drainage issues, or things like speed bumps, because you need to have, apparently, from what I read, you have to have street lights if you put a speed bump, or things like that, and we couldn't understand that. So we kind of said, oh, look, there's no permission being applied. There were 2 sections of road that were tarmacked over like a 7-8 year period since we moved in. So we thought, oh, because there was no one applied for it, there was no permission. It wasn't a highway, which is why we went to 2 metres high. But we didn't actually go 2 metres high. We went to 1.7 metres only because the elevation from where our windows are to the neighbours' windows on that picture there, as you can see quite clearly that they would get a full view of our house and we'd get a full view of their window. So that was the only reason we went to 1.7 metres. So the reason it's 1.7 metre high is because the ground is very unlevel, and these are gaping cages. There's no cement or base. It's just stones with gaps in them, and as you each block is 0.5 of a metre high. So by the time you stack them with the cages, you get the extra centimetre offset.
Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Thank you. 2 things. I've never come across these kind of walls before. Are they specifically made like that so that you can get plants to grow up them?
that's our idea. The idea was we didn't want to just have a blank wall. There are brick walls along our road, but if you look at the walls, they get covered in it because it's not a paved road. The mud and the dust and everything covers the brick walls. This is we're hoping that over time soil and dust and everything will grow into the gaps, and then you will get things like moss things growing, and eventually plants can come through, ivy can come through. The plants that we've actually put in there right now produce little creepers and climbers that will go along the wall.
Right, is the picture, whoops, is that on? Yes. The picture that, yes, is that yours? Is that yours?
Mr. Laxman, you can't talk over somebody when they've got a microphone on. We have to do this separately, make sure everything's recorded. Sorry, Mr. Tucker. Councillor Mrs. Tucker, can you...
My question was, is that your wall?
Yes, that is our wall. We tried to start planting last year. We put those in, and that was like, I think, within about 4 months, but we didn't continue that because of all the planning and everything else going on, so we didn't do a lot since that time. But since then, having spoken to the planning officer, we have put in extra plantation. We can only do it from the south side because then they will go over the wall into the roadside, because the roadside, it will just get run over by drivers, so nothing will get... It's better to get it growing over the wall and hanging over the wall and also growing into the gaps.
Members, any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Laxman. Councillor Goodison, you're the ward councillor. Do you wish to speak now or leave the debate? It's up to you.
Well, are you? If anybody wishes to question the officers first, I'll wait till after that, if I may. Thank you.
Members, questions to officers. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. We just heard that it's difficult to plant the other side, which I guess is the northern side. It was also mentioned by the parish council that it's difficult to plant the other side. There is a condition in this report which actually stipulates that they should be planted in the northern side, or the northern edge of the existing. I think it's page 171, condition 2.
Yes, that's right. That's condition makes reference to the submission of a scheme of planting, and the intent of that condition is to help screen the northern edge. We're clearly aware that you can't actually physically plant on that side. However, the intention, and you've heard from the applicant, is that you'll be planted on the southern side. It would then grow up and over, and also some planting could take place within the crevices and cracks on that northern edge. And indeed, this is made reference to the use of those spaces being equally good for habitats for plants and insects by the biodiversity officer. So we feel that condition will ensure that we will get a decent scheme in that will do what as the applicant's outlined.
Also, can I just confirm that is a natural stone? I mean, I actually took the time on the weekend to go and have a look at that site because we didn't view it on Friday. But it looks to me like it's probably some form of natural stone.
I can't guarantee it, but I like you would assume that it is natural, but I don't know.
Any more questions to officers? Debate? Councillor Westbrook. Councillor Goodison, I'm leaving it to you to raise your hand when you want to speak.
Do you want to go first?
You'll defer?
I'll defer to the council.
And I'll come back to you. Okay, Councillor
Goodison. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say straight away that I did go and see Mr. Laxman, and he's a most charming and courteous man, and I'm disappointed that what I'm about to say is probably not going to please him very much, because I did get on with him very well and I would hate to upset him. I think I'd like to start off by saying that the the parish council comment, I think, summed the whole thing up rather neatly. It's too, it's where are we? The parish council, it says it's too tall and it's out and it's not in keeping with the immediate surrounding area. Looking at the back of the wall as it's currently planted up by Mr. Laxman is, you know, looks fairly acceptable. Sadly, of course, if the wall had been set back by a foot or 18 inches and it's been planted in the front as well, that would have been very helpful. But quite apart from that, I mean, the fact of the matter is that this type of wall is completely alien to the village of Basing and Lichfield. There are many sort of boundary fences and walls in the parish, brick, you know, natural manicured hedging, trees, wood, etc. There's absolutely nothing like this at all. And so, if I may just come to it, talking about the impact on the character and the street scene. The planning officer states, policy EM10 of the local plan states that the development should respond to the local context in terms of design, siting, etc., etc. I would suggest that this absolutely does not respond in any way to the local context in terms of design or siting or anything else. Talking about the MPPF, it says paragraph 60 states that the planning decisions should not attempt to impose architectural styles or particular tastes on the local community. This is, sadly, because this is something which is completely alien to this environment, is attempting, you know, to impose an architectural style which doesn't exist at the moment, and very few people have any fondness for it. The village design. We go on to the village design statement. I mean, as we all know perfectly well, the village design statement is only an indication of what people were like, and it doesn't have the status of a planning document. Nevertheless, the village design statement states quite categorically that they do not encourage or approve of this type of boundary. Now, the village has been for some time now in the process of producing a neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan, as we all know, does have the status of a planning document. The neighbourhood plan which the village has produced is currently, it's not yet adopted by the borough, is currently with the borough to be looked. This is the final document as presented by the parish, being looked at by the borough, and will eventually hopefully be accepted at a full borough council meeting. And I have spoken to the chairman of the committee who has produced this, and he's quite happy for me to state categorically that this type of hedging, fencing, hedging, whatever, is totally, the neighbourhood plan would be totally opposed to, and would not wish to encourage. So I think, you know, it's a difficult one because when we look at the back of the wall, it's not, you know, it's reasonable. If I could just have the picture back of the front of the wall. But when you look at that picture, you realise that in a small rural street with maintained hedging on either side of it, that is just not appropriate, unfortunately. And I get back to the thought that if it had been put a foot or two further back, some planting could have been done immediately in front of it, which would have covered it up nicely. The planning officer states that one of the reasons for approval states the development is considered acceptable in design terms and whilst different to existing boundary treatments in the vicinity of the site fits, etc., etc., etc. So it accepts that, she accepts that it's different to existing boundary treatments. She maintains that it's considered acceptable in design terms. I would state that it is totally unacceptable in design terms, and I would move refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And that's proposed and seconded. I've got a couple more councillors who want to say anything, but I'll accept the motion has been proposed and seconded for refusal. I'll let that rest for the moment. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. I was listening to what Mr. Laxman said in relation to vehicles damaging his hedge. So in some respects, I'm pretty sure that's a pretty substantial piece of wall in there, and I can understand why it's got the depth that it has. All I can say is when I drove down there, it's quite narrow at that point. I can understand it would be often vehicles probably coming quite close to each other there. I had to reverse back down the road when someone was coming the other way. It's not easy to pass there. So I can imagine with larger vehicles there would be an issue. So having something more substantial there does make quite a lot of sense. But also from all I can talk from is from my own experiences as a landscaper over years, is that type of stone is quite easily weathered, as the report I think mentions as well. And obviously with the type of vegetation, you can already see from the inside, given time, I think you probably wouldn't even know it was a wall. It would be green, similar height to the other hedges. But obviously there's been a recommendation there, and obviously, you know, we have to vote accordingly. But I personally can't see any issue with it. It's not quite as severe as I thought it probably might be. And it certainly tapers down towards the entrance. So.
Councillor McCormack.
Wow. Well, taking a look at that wall, and I'm sure there'd be a very nice dry stone wall in Yorkshire or somewhere like that. It does remind me of those, quite often you have highway developments and you get these blocks of granite encased in wire mesh by the side of the road, and normally they're there so that eventually plants will grow on it, and it will be softened. I do have to say though, bearing in mind two things. One, the reason why I was put in, because the existing privet hedge was being damaged by cars. I mean, that wall won't be damaged by cars, that's for sure. The cars that hit it will be more damaged. But I don't think we have any material reasons to refuse this. So I can't support refusal, unfortunately.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, listening to Mr. Laxman, I accept what he says. I haven't heard any evidence to the contrary that he would have genuinely, I think, been unsure about the status of the road in question, and therefore in good faith, I think, believed that he could have a wall of a higher height. I mean, in terms of the 0.7 of a metre that we're talking about, I mean, my simple calculation suggests it's about 22 inches, I think, higher than it would be if it was built at 1 metre. And certainly the Parish Council's summary note talks about the Parish Council supports enforcement action, and that's what we'll be talking about if we go for refusal, by the way, to have the wall brought down or reduced. It is too tall and out of keeping, but in terms of its height, I mean, there seems to be a proposition there that were it down at 1 metre, it would be acceptable. And I genuinely do not see the merit of going down that road. I mean, the officer's commentary, I think, is one that I accept. I mean, of course I accept there may be some generalisation about what you'd normally experience in that location, but the question for us, does it fit acceptably within the general character and appearance of the surrounding area? And this is a subjective view on my part, I accept, but it's also subjective views of other people who say it doesn't. I say it does. It's unusual. It's an unusual design. I mean, I've seen Gabion walls, whichever way you say that elsewhere. The principle of them, I think, is good, really, in many ways, in terms of the sort of dry construction and also the opportunity for those walls to take natural vegetation in due course. And this will happen in this case. And it sounds to me, if Mr. Laxman is given the nod this evening that this is going to be retained, then additional planting can take place, admittedly not on one side, but on the other, and will grow over and hang down, and that seems to me would mitigate against those people who do find it unacceptable. But I don't, and I think it is an application that we should approve, and I'm happy for it to be approved this evening, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Robinson, followed by Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. I had a drive down there on Friday after we'd done the viewing bus, and to me, I was driving down a very green, leafy lane, and then all of a sudden you come across this rather brutal stone and steel thing that looks like it should have a Grimsby trawler attached to it. And Mr. Laxman pointed out that there was a wall opposite. Well, looking at the photo that's up now, the wall that is opposite is about half a metre high and topped by a hedge. It doesn't have the brutal impact that this massive sort of steel work and stonework has. So I think it does contribute EM10. I think it contravenes 1C, 2 and 2A. So I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne.
I mean, as a look, I mean, I don't think I'll be putting it up myself, but it is there, and I'm sort of reassured by the condition 2 on page 105 or 171 that the officer spoke about at the very beginning about the planting, and we've been told that the planting will be what already has been put in, but has been halted because the applicant wasn't sure as to the status of the application and what was going to happen. But if that planting occurs and it goes over to the north side and the wall is then sort of masked and then it weathers, then I don't think we really have any planning reasons for refusing the application.
Right, anybody else? Because I'll speak, because I think we have planning reasons. They've been quoted by the Parish Council. EM10 has been quoted by members of the committee. I have to say that it is any owner-occupier of a property to find out the regulations whereby you can erect fences and everything else. It's a little complex, I know. I have to cite my own property because internally against my next door neighbour there's a 1.7 metre fence. Where I border onto Coffield Lane, it's 1 metre high. And it's as simple as that. If I'd wanted to go any higher, yes, I would have had to apply planning permission, which is what's happening in this case. However, looking at the location, it does seem completely out of place. It's not sympathetic to the local environment. I'll pass a comment because all I can rely on are the photographs today, but I noticed that the adjacent hedges to this property on either side of them are in remarkably good condition. They aren't damaged in any way by vehicles or anything else. They're manicured, and it's a very nice scene, and we've had members who have travelled down there separately to have a look at it. On that basis, personally, I cannot support this application because there's too much, and I think we've got to listen to the parish council, to the local people, the people who live in the local area. They have to live with this day upon day, year after year, and I tend to listen to them. That's my view. Are there any other views before we go to a vote? I've got one motion for refusal. That was put forward. Pardon me? Yes, refuse and enforce. Yes, I accept that. and it's what you mentioned, Councillor Potter. Councillor Potter.
I mean, can I just ask for a point of clarification? I mean, in regard to, you know, if refusal is the decision of this committee, and in terms of enforcement, what are we talking about? It being reduced down to 1 metre, or for it to come out altogether? Because, I mean, it seems to me that's within our remit, and that's a choice that has to be made. I mean, how brutal is the decision of this committee going to be in that regard?
Reduced to 1 metre. Because it wouldn't be before if it was at 1 metre, because that's permitted development. But then, but everything else comes out once it comes to committee. Then everything comes into consideration because it's a planning application, and the policies then kick into place. That's the difference. Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to point out, and I know it's a confusing issue here, but I'd just like to point out, as far as the parish council is concerned, as far as the village design statement is concerned, as far as the neighbourhood plan is concerned, and as far as the local residents are concerned, we would prefer it if it was removed completely and replaced by something much more sensitive to the local environment in which it sits. Thank you.
Yeah, the complete removal would not be considered reasonable, given that under permitted development, the wall could be constructed to 1 metre in height without requiring any permission from use. So therefore, we would advise that to recommend the complete removal of the wall as being unreasonable.
Councillor Goodison.
I respect what the borough officer says, but I would just point out that, you know, when the objection which the local community and the parish council and etc. have is simply that it's not conducive to the local scene and shouldn't have been produced at all. Are you saying that anybody can put up any sort of wall they like anywhere, as long as it's only 1 metre high? So I could put one up which was razor sharp barbed wire.
Yes, that's correct.
Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, I'm struggling a little bit because even yourself, you've mentioned about the aesthetics of this, manicured hedges all the way down the road. I mean, from a visual point of view, a few years down the road, when that's completely covered in vegetation, you're going to be struggling to find the difference between that and the hedges on a visual point of view. And I think if that's the main argument, personally, I don't think that stands up.
I think Councillor Potter summed it up. It's subjective, and it's so much in planning is subjective. I think we have our views. We're here to express them. Councillor Potter.
I just want to make one observation, Chairman, if I may. I mean, I think I understood the point you were making about the hedges either side and their manicured nature and all the rest of it. If in any way that's meant to imply that Mr. Laxman may not have been telling us a true story in regard to his experiences, I don't want to be associated with that. I'm content with his evidence that he gave us this evening, and I rest on that. I've heard nothing different, and so I'm not associated with any implication there. And I hope, well, there may be others on the committee who agree with me, but I do not want that to be anything that is considered to be the position of this committee.
I did qualify all that by saying I can only go by the photographs presented to us tonight. That's all I said. Right. Yes, Councillor Tucker.
Ask a question actually of Councillor Westbrook with his expertise. What was that plant that was growing over the...
Here?
Yes.
So the nasturtiums, aren't they?
Yes, but
I mean,
aren't they annual?
Yeah, but there's references in the conditions here, I think, ivy. You can plant ivy in little pots.
Yeah, can we use the microphones, please?
It's like Gardeners' questions, aren't it? I mean, there's pockets in there. I mean, you can put pockets of soil. I mean, ivy grows, sticks to lots of things and grows, you know. But I mean, if you took, and it's quite close. That is, yeah, but I mean, I think Mr. Laxman said that he stopped any planting programs at all, but I mean, I think he actually talks about ivy in here, which is probably something similar to that, or alpines, all sorts of things you could put on that wall.
Right, it's been proposed and seconded for refusal and enforcement. All those in favour of refusal? All those against? And that's carried for refusal.
Can I just clarify that the motion is to refuse and enforce. In terms of the reasons for refusal, members have based their decision on the impact on the character and appearance of the area, and therefore would conflict with policy EM10 of the local plan and the village design statement, and the steps to be taken in terms of the enforcement action to reduce the wall back to 1 metre in height.
Did you want? Right, thank you very much. Move on to item number 8. Could I ask Mr. Meissen to come down, please? Apologies for pronunciation. Meissen. I'd like to sit there while we present the application.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application to partially convert the existing triple garage to ancillary residential accommodation, together with alterations to the roof of the existing garage building. That will include dormer window. I draw members' attention to the update sheet. Some additional comments have been received from adjoining neighbour at number 14, and all of those are set out in full for you there, and some adjustments to the distances, measurement distances from properties, and as stated in the main report, and also a correction in terms of the reference to the increased ridge height. And then to commentary from the officers in relation to the additional points raised by the neighbouring property owner. The recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the main report.
Thank you very much. Mr. Meissen, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the objectors in Hollycroft and the Parish Council to the proposed conversion of the garage. I do live at 14 Hollycroft, the property to the southeast of the proposed works. The design and access statement supplied with the application states that there'll be no visual impact on the neighbours. However, I think you've seen the photographs that say that that is the case. There have also been concerns from other neighbours that will be affected by the very nature of a dormer window being installed. Neighbours at number 12 are also very concerned that the front door and one of the main living room windows will now be just 1.5 metres from their boundary fence and only approximately 7 metres from the patio outside their main living area, significantly raising the potential for noise intrusion. The current existing development has been sensitively designed when built, and there is no significant overlooking between any other properties. The original planning application for the development stated categorically, the garage is hereby approved shall not be used for any residential purpose other than as a domestic garage. I've had no explanation from the planning officer as to why this condition is now being ignored, or what changes to the planning legislation allow this application to be deemed able to be approved. If approved, this could set a precedent for applications to be submitted for the other 8 detached garages in Hollycroft to be converted, thus fundamentally changing the character of the development and leading to parking congestion. It is also common knowledge to the majority of residents of Hollycroft that the applicant intends to use the proposed development as a commercial venture. He has told me this and others that is what he plans to do by renting the annex out to tenants on short-term leases. This is in direct contravention of condition 4 of the planning report before you. The design and access statement submitted with the application states the ridge height will not be raised. The architect's drawings submitted with the application, which the planning decision seems to be based on, are factually incorrect, showing a roof pitch of 45 degrees. The actual pitch of garage roofs are 35 degrees. And if you look at the proposed and existing elevations, you even have different ridge heights on different elevations on the screen in front of you. With a 35-degree roof pitch, this means there will be insufficient height within the roof space, calculated at less than 1.8 metres for accommodation. Having spoken to the planning officer this afternoon, I find it incredulous that the approval be granted on incorrect drawings. I would request that the committee refuse this application on these grounds, and if you're not minded to do so, then I would ask that a decision to defer until a site visit can be arranged to see that the drawings are incorrect and that there is significant impact on neighbouring properties. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Members, any questions to Mr. Meisen? No? Thank you very much. Councillor Radican. And Councillor Radican is speaking tonight as the applicant and not as the ward member. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I agree with the reasons for approval, and the conditions seem to me to be fair and reasonable, and especially with regard to the window facing number 12, which is going to be blocked off, obscure and non-openable. I think that is a reasonable request for my neighbours and is justified in this application. The height is increasing, as noted to you in the update, but as Councillor Potter rightly pointed out, a 0.7 metre increase is about 22 inches, and therefore a 0.4 is around a foot, about the length of a size A4 sheet of paper. So in terms of impact, I think the officer has got it right. It is an annex to our own. We're happy that it won't be rented out. That seems to be the current state of affairs, so we will accept that as thing. But it meets policy and will obviously be a good addition. It won't set a precedent because no other house in Hollycroft has 3 garages. So there is no chance that it can set a precedent for development. The tree behind us is a large apple tree in the back garden of 12, and that grows by 1.5 feet every year. So, you know, the screening is good. You can see the 2 trees on the photograph, one very large, and the apple tree behind it, 2. So that is well screened, and the fact that we've put a blank in the dormer means that we're not overlooking the back. Now, I accept Chris's comment that there will be some additional views into his garden, but it is at an angle and not directly. And most people only look out of their bedroom window in the morning when they open the curtains and at night when they close them. The living accommodation, which is there, is on the ground floor and looks directly towards our main house. So I think with the officer's work and what my architect has done, although he made a mistake in the height, I would ask you that you approve this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just use Mr. Radican at the moment. But any questions to the applicant, members? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Councillor Radigan. I may need to get this from somebody else as well, really, but reference has been made, and obviously, I don't know when you purchased this property, but some original conveyance stroke condition that garages couldn't be converted or used for any residential purpose. I mean, are you aware of that, and what's the history of that?
We have been residents there since they were built. We've been there for more than 15 years. My understanding is that there was a covenant for 5 years on which no additions were made. I wasn't aware of the accommodation condition on on the property, but 15 years later, since the application was made, it does not seem unreasonable that we can come back in here and ask for a change. Because how many garage conversions are there in your own wards? I think many.
Any more questions? Councillor Robinson, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little confused on the drawings because on page 119, the front elevation on the ground floor shows 2 garage doors and a window. Yeah, on the plan on page 120, it shows 1 garage door and a window. Which is it?
There will be 2 garage doors, so it'll look like a blank. It's just to increase the floor space. So we're using 2 of our garages, essentially, but we will give ourselves accommodation for our obviously our own car, a car, which we don't always use in the garage, and a little bit more space for obviously for our garden equipment and things like that, so we don't have a shed.
Any more questions? Thank you, Ken. Members, questions to officers? Nothing? Oh, Councillor Potter.
Sorry, Chairman. I only want to pursue the point that I made with Councillor Rattigan in terms of, what is said here by the Parish Council to be a condition, covenant, perhaps, as Councillor Rattigan has said, dating back to the original approval which is cited. I mean, what is the status of that, or does he make a good point about that probably exists on many developments, and the years roll by and garages become something else, and quite frankly people forget about the relevance of the original covenant. What situation are we in here?
My understanding is this refers to a covenant, which is something different to a planning condition, and therefore whilst we may or may not grant planning permission, even if we did and there were other requirements from separate legislation that needed to be dealt with, that wouldn't prevent you from actually granting the permission.
Any more questions? Debate? No debate? Councillor Leeks?
I'm happy to move the recommendation, and one of the reasons is in my own road we've got virtually everybody's got a double garage, but half of them don't use it and they park it outside anyway, and it's just most of them are ancillary to the house with various bits of furniture, etc., etc. I wonder sometimes when we build garages, because half of them, as I say, are not. And just a query regarding the covenant. They were covenants on every house on my road except for mine.
Councillor Westbrook.
Happy to second it, Chair.
Thank you. Been duly moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? Thank you. Officers?
Yep, the application is granted, subject to the conditions set out in the main agenda.
Thank you. Move on to number 9.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 9 is land on the north side of Wildmoor Lane in Sherfield-on-Loddon. The application seeks permission for the erection of a stable block and hay store, change of use to the land from agricultural use to equestrian, and the installation of a 40-metre by 20-metre riding arena for recreational use. Members will note that a previous application was refused at Planning Committee in November 2016. This application that's before you today has been amended to address previous concerns raised. The changes summarised are: the size of the stable building has been reduced, the position of the stable building and the outdoor riding arena has been moved away from the southern boundary and reorientated to increase the distance from the nearest neighbouring property to the southeast, Sanguillo Sanguillo Cottage. The riding arena has also been located to the east of the access and is proposed to be enclosed by 1.35 metre high post and rail fencing, with new native hedging also proposed along the front boundary adjacent to Wildmoor Lane. With regard to the update, 2 further letters of support have been received, and 1 letter raising no objection. An amended site layout plan has also been received, including additional planting, showing additional landscaping. The application is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Mr. Neal to come forward, please? Good evening, Mr. Neal, and you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Chair, councillors, members and officers. Not enough has changed in this new application, which might cause the parish council to alter its opinion. The parish itself now has a published neighbourhood development plan at pre-consultation stage, and we're guided by this, so the application does not fit in with the following policies. Protection and enhancement of the natural environment. Buildings on agricultural land will diminish that resource in perpetuity. Reducing flood risk. Any development would exacerbate the risk of flooding to properties on the south side of Wildmoor Lane, despite the mitigating soakaways, as flooding has nowhere else to go. And also improving road safety in Sherfield on Loddon. The addition of horse trailers using Wildmoor Lane Junction on a regular basis is a retrograde step for safety. The applicant's planning agent has provided a number of inconsistencies, stating that the development is for private use only. This is not compatible with that fact that 5 stables are proposed. We understand only 1 horse is owned by the applicant. There could be a third-party owned horses or ponies on site. Will at some point be paying for services, so it's a de facto business in some ways, even if it's not run by a limited company. Site for family use only. A 12-year-old granddaughter doesn't stay 12 forever, so this again is a statement that can't be guaranteed nor enforced by the council. It is likely that a number of the horses will be limited to 3. Why? Because that is not a promise and a condition that also cannot be enforced. Also, 5 horses in the available suitable free land is too many. Site to be visited daily. That can be any hours of day or night, so potential for disturbance of neighbours. The Wyvale Garden Centre closes at 6 o'clock at night for licensing purposes, so unlimited access to stables is inconsistent with the area and light pollution is unquantified. At the last planning hearing, the agent said that the animals are only a couple of ponies. As indicated by Councillor Nick Robinson, they are valuable horses that will need plenty of management and security. 1 or 2 residents have written their support for the application on the basis that it is to support a young, talented rider to reach her potential. Whatever talent she does have does not confer extra rights as far as planning is concerned. Second one is it's better to have an equestrian centre than the potential for gypsy traveller incursion. If there is any incursion, it would be dealt with by law enforcement, not by building something to avoid a future potential crime. Thirdly, it would vastly improve the visual appearance. A building on agricultural land, this is a rural area, so fields are meant to be fields. Many neighbours have opposed. The site was part of a farm on agricultural land. Councillor Robinson's previous comments are that correct that 5.5 acres are not a viable farm, but the applicant knew that when he purchased the land at over 6 times market value. So there was no intention to farm the land. If all the farmland in Sherfield on Loddon were to be sold piecemeal in the same way, then there would be no farmland left. The Parish Council maintains that the original reasons for refusal of the previous application by your committee remain. Policy CN9, EM10 and EM12. We note the recommendation of the planning officer is to approve permission with some operational conditions, but these are few, weak and unenforceable in the longer term. I would like to finish by asking that if finally the council is so minded to grant its approval, then to reduce the size of the stable block and to include a condition that no residential dwelling is ever permitted on that site. And if equestrian activities cease, then the site remains as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for the Parish Council? No, thank you very much. Yep. Mr. Smith and Ms. Miller. You have 4 minutes between you.
Thank you. Good evening, all. I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of Church End. To start with, I would just like to bring your attention to the reasons the previous application was rejected. 1, adverse impact upon the amenities of neighbouring properties in relation to noise and disturbance. 2, additional traffic onto the existing highway network would lead to an adverse impact on highway safety. 3, failure to show that the development would not increase the surface water runoff and that appropriate attenuation would be provided to prevent an increased risk of surface water flooding in a sensitive location. And 4, failure to submit sufficient information to satisfy the requirement for the adequate storage of waste on site, and as such, failure to show that the storage of waste would not result in pollution. Now, other than a reduction in 1 stable, we don't feel that any of these points have been addressed by the current application. In terms of highway issues, no consideration has been given to the speed limit of 60 miles an hour for Wildmoor Lane. At this point, the road is single track, just past a blind bend. There is considerable traffic with deliveries to the school and the garden centre complex, which is subject to much development in recent years, with no consideration for traffic and drainage. There is continual erosion of the frontage of residential properties. The traffic could potentially queue back onto the A33. In terms of drainage issues, the area, which is heavy London clay, is monitored by the Environment Agency, mapped as high flood risk for surface water. Surface water drains from the hillside of the A33, the Sherfield Court estate on the other side of the A33, and the hillside of Wildmoor Lane, including all surface water from the large garden centre. The water drains through a 12-inch pipe between the Laurels and Tandatula. These properties are affected by flooding during heavy storms. An upgrade in the drainage for this area is required. Furthermore, there is no mains drainage, and untreated horse waste from the field will drain into these open ditches through residential properties, with potential health consequences for residents. Disturbance. This facility will cause disturbance for neighbouring residents for the following reasons. 1, increased traffic along a single carriageway road. 2, usage of the riding arena, which aligns with the rear garden of a residential property. 3, lighting pollution, should flood lighting be installed. And 4, no restricted hours of use have been applied. As mentioned by Councillor Robinson at the Development Committee on the previous application, this development is likely to be used by fellow equestrian companions visiting the site to use the facilities. Planning for the 5 stables and 2 hay stores provides potential for commercial development and further equine use with no limit in terms of the number of horses, ponies or visitors. A further reduction in the number of stables and stores is preferable to reduce the disturbance and the potential for commercial use.
You have 1 minute.
Furthermore, owners of the horses live some distance from the facility, and therefore there is no immediate assistance for either injured or escaped animals in close proximity to a major highway, the A33. We respectfully ask the Development Committee to, at the very least, consider highway implications for the safety of the horses, drivers and residents, and introduce a reduction in the speed limit. Consider the surface water drainage and the health consequences of horse waste leaking into drainage channels. Consider the scale of the development, relocation away from residential properties and a reduction in the number of stables to reduce potential escalation into a commercial development. Remove any options to construct mobile field shelters and hence restrict the number of horses, and restrict the hours of use of the riding arena to reduce noise and allow neighbours in bordering properties to enjoy their gardens. The outcome of this planning permission will impact on other arable fields within the parish and the large arable field opposite this field, with a precedence for further riding arenas and stables in extremely close proximity to residential properties within the parish of Sherford-on-Loddon. Thank you.
gave you the extra few seconds. I could see what was happening. Okay, thank you very much. Members, any questions? Nope. Looks like you put something across. Thanks very much. Mr. Ellis, please. Good evening, Mr. Ellis. Don't worry, those lights will work. And microphone's in front of you. And you have 4 minutes. If you just pull the microphone towards you and press that button. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Ellis, I'm the applicant. Apologies from Fergus, my agent. He was going to attend, but unfortunately has a prior family engagement. I bought the land some 15 months ago for my granddaughter, Chloe, who's aged 12. She's passionate about riding and has been riding since she was 3 years old. She's quite accomplished and hopes this year to achieve being invited to compete in the national championships at around 1 metre 10. She's well on the way to doing that, and she has an ambition to achieve jumping at the highest level that she can do. This is her dream. To succeed this, and at this, you need to have an all-weather facility. The reason you need an all-weather facility, because unfortunately, if you jump on grass in the winter, it can be wet or frozen, and in the summer, it's too hard. Both of these can be very dangerous to both horse and rider. Therefore, when we purchased the land, the intention was to build a 20 by 40 facility, or weather facility, and stablings for this purpose. We purchased the land some 15 months ago, as I've said earlier, and it was in some state of disrepair. We've cleared all the ditches, the watercourses, which at the time were overgrown, in the same way as the council has up the A33. We've also reseeded the field with the appropriate mixture of grass. As you know, it's a reapplication, and we believe that the reapplication addresses all of those issues that were previously of concern. We've resited the stables as suggested at the last committee, and the application mitigates those concerns. And if you'll allow me, I'll just briefly whip through those. Highways. Minimal impact. There have been no objections from the highway officer, and we're happy to accept their conditions. It will be an impact of one car probably twice a day, at least, visiting the horses, either to check them, muck them out, or whatever. Drainage. There have been no objections from the drainage officer. We've now improved the drainage so that in this proposal, any surface water that runs off from the stables or the arena will go into a vertical circleway via a French drain and therefore not seep into anywhere else. Lighting. Following on from the previous application, we have now agreed that we would include one external light. This will be lower level, hooded and directional, so that it will not affect neighbours. It will point away from neighbouring facilities. Landscaping. The perimeter will be fenced with standard equestrian post and rail. We've also planted already, as you might have seen in the photographs, a native hedge and trees along Wildmoor Lane. And we propose further planting between the stables and the lane to improve the amenity impact and further ensure that it's screened from neighbours.
You have 1 minute.
Security. Site will be secured, be visited at least twice a day. We propose CCTV, and we live just about 10 minutes away. In conclusion, we believe the proposal is in keeping with other schemes that have already been approved by the borough. We've amended the scheme to fit in with the council's concerns. The proposal is for the use by my granddaughter. It is a small private scheme which enables the land to be used more productively going forward. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you. And members, any questions from the applicant? Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Good evening.
Would you put your microphone off, please? Thank you.
With planting and things, is that not too many oak trees are planted because the horses will eat the acorns. Are you taking that into consideration?
We have taken it. Sorry. We have taken it into consideration, yes.
Councillor Bound.
This is for your granddaughter. I mean, how many horses does she have?
We have 3 horses presently, and that would probably be rationalised down to 2, simply because as you progress you get a different horse, and they are costly.
I know nothing about horses. Then why do you need 5 stables?
One of the horses is out on loan and therefore may return. Secondly, there's an immense amount of kit that comes with horses. Stables are an easy place to store stuff. So, for example, the horses will have probably up to 20 rugs in different facilities. There's bridlery, there's tack, there's a whole host of stuff, and therefore one of the stables will be utilised, the largest stable will be utilised as a tack room.
Right, any more questions? Thank you very much. Councillor Rowland, please.
I'd be happy if we did questions to officers first, if that's all right.
I think we'll need to change your names around or something. There's Councillor Rowland. I will enunciate it a little better for you. Good evening, Councillor Rowland. You have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. Residents and the Parish Council have raised objections again on this previously refused application, these being traffic and road safety issues, noise and disturbance, light pollution, waste disposal, flooding and the actual enforcement of the conditions outlined in the officer's recommendation. The recommendation for approval cites policy CN9, EM10 and EM12. CN9. I have concerns that this development does not provide safe, suitable and convenient access for all potential users, as this is a narrow lane now with planning consent in place for an adventure golf course to be located in the garden centre, which will significantly increase the traffic. It accesses the A33, where there's been recent and significant accidents resulting in closures of a busy route. Additionally, with horse boxes and large vehicles, the site does result in additional traffic generation and as such could compromise highway safety. EM10. In taking residents' objections on board, there are question marks around the development positively contributing to local distinctiveness, the sense of place and the existing street scene. There are differing views on the site being well connected, accessible and safe due to its location and purpose. On the matter of lighting, internal and external lights have now been included on this site application, which could cause light pollution in an area where there is no street lighting. EM12 references development will be permitted provided that it does not result in pollution. Equine waste has a significant environmental and health issues attached to it, and within this application I've been unable to find adequate remedial or mitigating measures proposed except for a manure store located next to the parking area, with no indication of its construction, nor is there a clear statement to the storage of such waste in line with the duty of care required by the Environmental Agency, just a sentence that this will be undertaken. The manure storage should be well-constructed permanent manure store and therefore have a concrete base which slopes backwards of the store in the absence of a sealed tank for waste, and solid sides which will prevent the muck from spilling out and contaminating adjacent land. Ideally, the muck should be kept as dry as possible. On the site itself, the British Horse Society recommends the provision of 1 to 1.5 acres per horse. This is considered the minimum acreage for good horse management. However, DEFRA recommend in their code of practice 1.25 to 2.5 acres per horse. I have concerns that under the Animal Welfare Act 2006, Section 9 2A of the Act, in terms of suitable environment, this site could not comply. A concern is the issue of horses being left unattended on the land. During summer, the horses could be turned out into the pasture grazing area and winter held in the stables. DEFRA has outlined in its code of practice the requirements for the supervision of horses.
Just
I
under
note
1
that the
minute.
applicant will be installing online monitoring cameras. However, this still could be an issue with the proximity, being some 4.5 miles away. When I met the applicant on site to discuss the revised application, I did again express these concerns, and he acknowledged that this site was not perfect. The applicant has already removed hedgerows on the property, and I note that the tree officer's report highlights that the hedgerows and trees should have a protection plan in place. Whilst we cannot see into the future, there is a concern of subsequent planning application for a residential dwelling for the care of the animals could potentially come forward, as you must have heard this evening on one of the similar applications. Lastly, I would like to request that you review the reasons for refusal previously. I don't believe any of these reasons for refusal have been mitigated by this application, and therefore I would urge you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Rowland? Nope. Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. In reference to the previous, I mean, I think there've been several of the reasons for refusal seem to have been addressed by the applicant, but wanted to draw Committee's attention to the flood risk on page 194 or 128, whichever number you want to use. It states that the stable building and riding arena have been moved away from the area of the site which may be at risk of surface water flooding, which was an issue raised during the consideration of the previous application. However, if you turn to page 192 and the officer's report, it mentions within the, I think it's the second paragraph, that this results in a more fragmented situation where the built-up form doesn't follow the development pattern, and in addition there is an increased amount of hard surface proposed. I'm just wondering, in relation to the previous issues on the refusal about surface runoff, I know the highways officers talked about detailed methods of construction, hard standing to make sure there's adequate drainage. I just wonder if there's any more detail on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. The comments made on page 192 in that middle paragraph are the case officer is making the views of the landscape officer known, and obviously explaining that there would be, factual changes in siting and layout, and there will be additional hard surfacing, but consequently the application has been considered by the local land drainage authority, who have raised no objections, based upon the scheme that's now proposed and based upon the relocation of the buildings.
Any more questions to officers? Councillor Bell?
Yeah, it's how does an acre relate to a hectare?
Just under half.
An acre is.
There's 2.2 acres to the hectare.
Thank you.
It's like pints to litres. Any more questions? Nope. Debate. Board Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. I've had several meetings with Charles Ellis on site over this, and he's been as helpful as anybody possibly could be. He's moved it away from Sanguillo Cottage, virtually right to the other side of the site, which is a vast improvement. He's also moved it up the field, which was one of my biggest concerns, that the arena was immediately adjacent to the road, which meant where it's artificially drained, it would drain directly onto the road. Where it is now, there's at least a good chance that the natural runoff rate will reinstate itself by the time any water gets down to the road, which is the main area of concern. I actually took the trouble to go down there this evening, and as anybody knows who's driven around the lanes today, they are flooded. That point of Wildmoor Lane today isn't flooded. It's certainly no worse than it ever has been over the last couple of years. And actually, to me, it actually looks slightly drier. I also looked in the ditches that have been dug. They were nowhere near full. And that's certainly on the rainiest day we've seen this winter. The horse waste, I seem to remember in the previous application, Mr. Ellis said he would be having it removed by skip. And yes, you know, waste on site, there is a risk of it contaminating water, but you wouldn't need any planning permission or any waste removal scheme if that was pigs that were being kept on there, cows that were being kept on there. That would just be what is accepted on, you know, an agricultural site. In terms of lighting, there's no application for any flood lighting to the arena or even to the stable yard itself. As Mr. Ellis said, it's one low-level light, working light, and it will be angled away from the property, which seems reasonably sensible. It is an unlit area, and you know, lighting is is sensitive in that area, and I certainly wouldn't support having that area, you know, the arena lit. But all in all, I think he's done. It's a vastly better improvement application than the previous one, which I notably didn't support. So generally, I think he's addressed certainly most of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Potter.
I mean, certainly, you know, when I read the report, I was, I think, pleased to note, obviously, the preamble from the Parish Council started, whilst appreciating this plan is much improved scheme, but then goes on, obviously, to object, and we've heard, obviously, from the Parish Council this evening. But looking at it in the round, I mean, in terms of the changes that have occurred and reflecting on some of the things that we said at the last meeting, and retrospectively, I was supportive of it then, and I remain so. And this improved scheme, I think, is worthy of approval. And I commend it. And on that basis, I'd move it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Westbrook. I'm taking that as a seconder. It's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? That's carried. Bosses.
Thank you, Chair. To confirm, the application is approved as per the officer recommendation, the conditions listed in the agenda, and based on the amended site layout plan as reported in the update. Thank you.
The next application is for the erection of two single-storey rear extensions, a 1.8 metre side gate and fence, replacement boundary wall to the front and side of property, front garden path, resurfacing of driveway, reinstatement of finial, new barge boards at the front of the property at 7 Fairfields Road, Basingstoke. The majority of these works wouldn't ordinarily require planning permission, particularly those referred to the front of the property, but given that the site lies within a conservation area, there's a requirement that planning permission is sought for those various works. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the update paper, in the main report.
I'll just add that the application comes from a member of staff of Basingstoke Borough Council. On that basis, I move it from the chair for approval. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. I've got a seconder here, Councillor Leeks. All those in favour of this application? Thank you. Carried.
The application is approved.
Number 11.
Thank you, Chair. This final application is located at 34 Upton Crescent in Basingstoke. It seeks permission for the conversion of the loft along with a hip to gable extension and the installation of 2 rear dormer windows and front roof lights. It should be noted the property is a first floor masonette. There is a number of changes in the update. Just to raise to members' attention that an additional representation was received from Councillor Harvey and James, and to note that the proposal was amended during the application process from its original submission of 1 single dormer window to the rear to 2 smaller pitch roof dormer windows as per the agenda plans and the visualiser plan there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Councillor Harvey. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's my usual at the end of the agenda slot for Norden, which I will be. Residents in Upton Crescent are concerned about this application, particularly from an application from somebody that doesn't live and hasn't lived in Upton Crescent. And the concerns they raise really relate to the harm that this development will do to the character and form of the street scene. We're talking about this location being typical of maisonettes in 4 units up the street in a curved parade that results in quite an important local street scene that has been the street scene since those properties were actually built. It is also the fact that across the road there are family units as well as the maisonettes, so there is an important balance within the street between the smaller units that these particular properties represent and the family units that are on the other side of the street. So in the context of what we've often faced in Norden, where we've seen houses, family houses, being converted into smaller units because there is a demand in our ward allegedly for smaller units, we are now faced with one of those smaller units being converted into a larger property. But the manner of the conversion is a dormer conversion in a loft, such that the footprint of the property and the actual conduciveness of the loft to the conversion in itself is a question. Does the loft, in the context of what is proposed by this developer, by this landlord, actually result in a sense, the roof being capable of offering what is being proposed? And I think that's an important question, not necessarily perhaps even for planning, but it will be relevant with building control. There are already noise issues with the existing properties. There are noise issues and disturbance issues and amenity issues within the context of that which currently exists, let alone that which would come potentially with this dormer conversion. So the question, does this do material harm, both on scale and nature of a first floor, 1-bedroom maisonette being converted to a 2-floor, multiple bedroom property, when we are actually, in a sense, needing, and we've got it in our local plan in the context of smaller units in an area that already has family housing is a very relevant question. In terms about viability and sustainability of the proposal, not just for the roof space, but in terms of what we've seen with other properties of conversion in our ward, the services, the manner of which the property would be serviced and used, and the transformation of the property in that regard. The car parking, there's no off-road parking proposed at all with this with this property. The properties in the area have got off-road. There's nothing proposed here, so it would be an impact on the street. There are issues of parking to do with peak times and in terms of the nature of potentially the number of occupants you might eventually see in this property. That is of weaker consideration, I think, set against the issues of the changing nature of the property, the street scene, and the loss of a smaller unit, particularly set against our local plan policies. I remember the arguments, we've had them on many occasions, trying to defend family housing from conversion, and I'm sat before you this evening saying, actually, I'm trying to defend a smaller unit, and we can't have it both ways.
1 minute.
I also bear in mind the Chair's comments earlier this evening. Listen to local people who will live with the consequences of these applications. The residents are saying the impact this will have on their street and on their street scene and the change that it will be, as it is the first dormer to be proposed in Upton Crescent. So it is significant, and it will set a precedent, and it will be important for the future shape of this particular street ongoing. And I ask you this evening to consider those points and to consider rejecting the current proposal as it stands before you. And I think we can do a lot better than this. And but honestly, I think the residents would prefer not to see the dormer and to keep the maisonette. It is a well-used and very popular smaller unit.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Harvey? I got one. Is there a parking space allocated to this property now, today?
No, it would be out the front on the street.
So it's street parking.
Whereas other properties have got off-road parking, this one doesn't appear to have at all and doesn't have any proposal for such.
Thank you. So, got off lightly tonight. Members, questions to officers? I've got one. Do we have, or should there be parking, some form of parking applied to this application?
With regard to parking, there is no allocated parking for these properties. The proposal is located in what we consider to be a reasonably well sustainable location in an inner urban area. So therefore, putting the requirements of parking aside, a new bedroom or two new bedrooms, as may be possibly the case, wouldn't necessarily require any additional parking. I think probably maybe not put that too clearly, but the on-street parking in any kind of event is not an uncommon arrangement, and the additional bedroom or two is not considered to generate parking that the existing dwelling wouldn't already be able to access on street, as with other masonettes or dwellings along that road. That's clarified it.
I'm going to ask you, I've got to try and nail this down. Let's assume this application is approved. That unit, would that attract a parking requirement? I don't think I can give me any clearer than that.
Yeah, I think the proposal is going from a 3-bedroom to 4-bedroom, and therefore there would be an increase in parking demand. And if you were looking at applying the standards for a 3-bedroom dwelling or a 4-bedroom dwelling, they are different, and a 4-bedroom dwelling is higher. However, I think we've made that assessment that we think, given the locality, the on-street parking that's available, and that there appears to be sufficient, that an additional bedroom would not generate a parking requirement that would not be able to be sufficiently achievable on the on-street parking, or that would create a parking situation that would give rise to any adverse impacts in terms of highway impacts that would be justified to refuse, just on that particular basis.
Okay, I asked the question because of the parking issues we've covered in 2 or 3 of the applications this evening. I know everything's on a case-by-case basis, but this is how we're looking at this one. And that's why I asked Councillor Harvey the question I did. And, okay, I've got an answer from the officers now. Any more thing in debate?
Thank you, Chair. Brian, something I sort of half picked up on that you mentioned on Friday about actually whether this needed planning permission or whether it could be done under permitted development. Could you just clarify where we are with that?
Thank you. As the property in question is a masonette, it does not benefit from permitted development rights as a single dwelling would benefit from, according to the General Permitted Development Order. So it requires planning permission for any alterations to the roof.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the report on page 215, under the impact of the character of the area and design, the report states it's noted that the conversion of the roof would be a new situation, that the numerous neighbouring buildings have retained their original roof design. However, the proposal would not result in any material harm. However, I think this is on one of those occasions anyone that was on the site visit could clearly see, especially on the external radius, as you looked at whole properties, quite unusually there was absolutely nothing in any of the roof space on that side of the road at all, and it was quite apparent. So obviously then you're thinking, well, is that a reason? I mean, I'm just looking at the local plan on parts of that, and if you go into EM10, for example, 2A of EM10, it says it should positively contribute to local distinctiveness, the sense of place and the existing street scene, taking into account all relevant SPDs. Also, if you turn over the page to 6.8 of that policy, it states, and I'll read most of it because it's all pretty relevant, really. I mean, the borough contains a wide variety of settlements that vary in size, character, and the role that they play in the local area. The town of Basingstoke contains a vast array of different architectural styles, from medieval almshouses to modern landmark office developments. This provides the challenge of responding to the very different designs needs of rural urban areas in terms of density, building styles and materials, and highlights the need for real understanding of the surroundings, local context and character before the design process begins. All future development will be expected to be of the highest quality in design and respond positively to the local context. The council encourages creative and innovative design where appropriate. Well, from my point of view, I was quite surprised at, the fact that it hadn't been touched, and I think that was, even though it's not in a conservation area, I think that's a very important factor, in my view anyway.
Councillor Leeks.
Thank you, Chairman. These were, of course, old AWE houses. When they were built, there was probably half a dozen cars for the whole of that road, because they certainly were in various parts of Tadley and Borghurst. So on-street parking was put. It's been a problem in many of the areas. Regarding putting another dormer, or not dormer, but whatever's going on the top, living accommodation. I know of at least 2, possibly 3 of these in these houses, Borghurst and one in Sanford Road in Tadley, and they really do look out of place. But they look out of place from everybody around them who's behind them. But I notice with this one, the only people that are behind is a open space with, I don't know if it's Normington. Yeah, open space. So, help, I'm sitting on the wall on this one. Mind you, I don't want to sit on the wall in this stage. But yes, I don't know. They do look out of place from the back if you've got houses going around the crescent at the back. So I really don't know which way to vote on this.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, I reflect obviously on the committee's earlier conversation about the wall in Basing, where some consideration, a lot of consideration was given really to the conformity of the particular road that we were looking at, the consistency of finish and appearance, all of that really, in the street scene as such as it was, and the need for that not to be changed if at all possible. And the committee came to the decision it did for the reasons that it did. And in this case, really, where a lot hinges, I think, about interpretation in regard to EM10, I mean, obviously the officer is saying the proposal would positively contribute to the street scene. I mean, I know this is subjective stuff, but I don't think it does that. It genuinely does not positively contribute. It changes it. It's whether that's acceptable or not. I'm of the view that it isn't acceptable, and I think in terms, albeit these are Verilux window type things at the front, it is going to break the sort of consistency of roof line that you have there at the present time. Other members may take the view, well, that doesn't really matter, and as other colleagues are saying already, really, in terms of the dormer windows at the rear, well, less harmful, less visual, all of that, really. But in terms of the consistency of roof line within the line of houses that go up Upton Crescent, this is going to have a one-off and disturbing implication, I think, for those residents. And I understand their concerns, just as I understood, I might not have agreed in all of it, with the concerns that were expressed by Basing residents in regard to the wall. In regard to this as well, I mean, the commentary is all made really in the context of EM10. Again, it's subjective, but, the requirement really of EM10 is to respect the local environment and to create something which is visually attractive. Well, again, I don't think this is visually attractive because of the disturbance to the pattern of roofs that we have within Upton Crescent. The parking issue that you raised, Chair, it's an interesting one. It's not insignificant. I mean, I know Upton Crescent because I live near there, and there's a substantial problem with parking, as there is in many residential areas. Of course there is. But anything that increases the number of potential occupants, many of whom all of us, depend on cars, is going to increase the parking problem there. That is a fact. And it's understandable, I think, really, that the local residents have said what they have in this regard, and I support their views.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? Councillor Bowen.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, we had the opportunity of going round to the next door neighbour and looking at the property from the rear, and it's quite apparent that those dormers would be, although they're not going to be viewed so much from the allotments or what it was at the back behind the hedge, they certainly would be viewed a lot by neighbours to the left and to the right when they were in the gardens, because they've got some garden areas. And I would agree with what Councillor Potter says about those velox or whatever they are at the front, upsetting the sort of the street scene. So I'm not.
Thank you. Getting a bit of a flavour here. I'm not going to make any comment because I wasn't at the viewing, and those who were, I think, are contributing an awful lot to this because they understand of what they saw. And in principle, I quite agree with them. Yes, Councillor Westbrook.
I'm looking at Mike here because obviously, in relation to EM10 is our local plan. Whether that's is something we could use as a reason for refusal, in which case, if it is, I'd like to propose that.
Right. Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Robinson. There we go. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify whether members will be seeking to refuse impact on the character of the area, street scene, but also the increased parking demand would also be unacceptable.
Yes, it's outside policy, not being able to provide the adequate parking facilities driven by the development of the property. Right, proposed and seconded for refusal. All those in favour of refusal of the application? Thank you. That's voted for refusal. Officers?
The application has been refused for the reasons that we've just referred to.
Thank you very much. Members, thank you very much for this evening. We got through 11 applications tonight, and it's 10 to 10. So thank you very much for your patience. Very successful. Oh, 20 past 10. Sorry, I was looking at the second hand there. 20 past 10.
Thank you, Chair.